Rosalie Bennett picked up the last photograph with 2 fingers, held it over the flame, and did not look away while Daniel Pruett's face turned to ash. She did not cry. She had finished crying 3 days ago. Alone in the back of her father's store, when Dottie Hanson told her cheerfully across a dry goods counter that Daniel was already married to Clara Whitfield, and people were saying they were already expecting. Rosalie had smiled, walked home, and cried until there was nothing left. Now she just watched him burn. Good riddance. If you have ever been told you were too much too loud, too big, too complicated, too difficult to love, stay right here. This story is for you. Hit that subscribe button right now and follow this channel. Because every week we bring you stories about women who refuse to disappear. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to Willow Creek, Texas, 1883. And let's talk about the morning everything changed. The ashes were cold by the time Rosalie moved. She stood up from the hearth, straightened her spine, the way her mother had taught her, shoulders back, chin level, like the world owed you nothing, and you intended to collect anyway, and she walked to the front of the store, flipped the sign from closive to open, and unlocked the door at exactly 7 o'clock in the morning. Same as every other Thursday. Same as every other day of the last 4 years. Because that was what Rosalie Bennett did. She kept going. She had been keeping going since she was 16 years old, and her mother died, and the weight of the world redistributed itself onto her shoulders without asking permission. And she had gotten very good at it, at the specific discipline of continuing to function while something inside you was quietly coming apart. She was 30 years old. She was the sole operator of Bennett's Ranch Supply, which her father had built when she was 7 and could no longer run since his heart began failing 2 years ago. She knew every account in the ledger by memory. She knew every rancher's supply schedule, every seasonal fluctuation in grain prices, every crack and settle of the building she had been walking through since before she could read. She was competent and capable and entirely alone, and the town of Willow Creek, Texas, had already decided exactly what that meant about her future. Too big, too outspoken, too independent, too much of everything the wrong kind. Not enough of anything the right kind. She had heard every variation. She had memorized the specific vocabulary people used when they wanted to be cruel while maintaining the appearance of concern, the tilted heads, the lowered voices, the expressions that said, "We're telling you this because we care about you," while the words said, "You are not the kind of woman a man chooses." Daniel Pruett had said it most recently, most precisely, 3 months before his quiet wedding to Clara Whitfield. "You're a good woman, Rosalie. A real good woman. But men out here, they want something easier. Easier." She had turned that word over in her mind for 92 days. She had examined it from every angle. She had laid it against the evidence of her actual life, the account books, the grain orders, the supplier negotiations, the 2 drought years she had kept this store solvent through sheer stubbornness, and she could not find, in any honest examination of the facts, what was too difficult about any of it. But she knew the answer. She had always known the answer. It wasn't her opinions or her ledgers or her stubbornness. It was the body all of that lived inside. Rosalie was a large woman. She had been large since she was 14, and she had spent every year since watching the world make its conclusions about her before she ever opened her mouth. She was not the slender kind of pretty that Willow Creek rewarded. She was broad and full and took up physical space in a way that made people uncomfortable, for reasons they could never articulate cleanly, but always found a method to express. She had learned to stand straight anyway. She had learned to look people in the eye when everything in her wanted to disappear. She was standing straight now, moving through the morning inventory with the automatic efficiency of long practice, when Earl McIntosh came through the door, 60 years old. Weathered as old fence post, a man who communicated primarily through hat angles and single syllables. He stopped inside the doorway. He looked at her. He looked at the cold hearth visible through the back doorway. He looked back at her. "Heard about Pruitt," he said. "I imagine most people did," Rosalie said, without looking up from her ledger. "Fool," Earl said. "That's Generison." "Not you." He moved toward the feed section. Conversation apparently concluded. Rosalie watched him go and felt something loosen very slightly in her chest, not enough to matter, but enough to notice. She filed it away and kept working. The morning moved the way supply store mornings always moved in small transactions. Brief conversations, the steady physical labor of keeping things where they needed to be. She hauled and measured and calculated and recorded. And she answered questions and processed payments, and did not think about Daniel Pruitt or Clara Whitfield, or the particular quality of silence in her rooms above the store after the last customer left each evening. She was calculating a quarterly grain order when the bell above the door rang just after noon, and she looked up expecting a familiar face. She found a stranger. Tall, genuinely tall, not the borrowed kind. He had the deliberate build of a man whose physical work had always been real and necessary, and he moved through the doorway with the unhurried, grounded economy of someone who had run out of things to prove a long time ago. Dark hair under a dust-gray hat, a jaw set in the permanent quiet of a man who chose his words carefully, and eyes when they crossed the length of the store and found hers the steady, particular brown that her mother had once said was the most trustworthy color a person could have. She had been 12 when her mother said that. She had never entirely stopped believing it. "Afternoon," he said. His voice was low without being forced low. "Afternoon," Rosalie said. "Help you with something?" He came to the counter without hesitation and set a handwritten list on the wood between them. Ranch foreman, new to the area, Wyatt Callahan, looking for most of what's on that list. She picked it up and read it. It was a good list, precise, organized, written by someone with actual working knowledge of what a ranch operation needed and why. No padding, no guesswork. "You've done this before," she said. "Few times," Wyatt Callahan said. "Where are you coming from?" "Colorado?" "Most recently." "Been moving a while," he said. "Looking to stop." She set the list down and began moving through the store, pulling items, marking her ledger. He followed at a distance that was respectful without being tentative, present, without crowding. "Half of this I have in stock," she said. "Rest I can order. 3-4 days, depending on road conditions." "That works," he said. She began tallying at the counter. She was aware of him watching the way she worked, not evaluating, not dismissing, not performing the particular brand of public pity she had learned to identify from a distance. He was watching the way a person watches someone who is good at something when they recognize the quality of it. It was an unfamiliar sensation. "You're running this place alone," he said. 4 years, she said. "Your father's?" "He built it, his heart's failing." "The store is mine now. What do I owe you?" he said. She told him the total. He paid without negotiating, not universal, among customers, and picked up what he could carry without being asked. He was almost to the door when he stopped. "That crack in your back storage wall," he said. "Left side, probably running 2 feet by now." Rosalie stared at him. "You could see that from the doorway," she said. "Spent 4 years in construction before ranching," he said. "Foundation settling, it'll widen before it stabilizes. Sooner you address it, the cheaper it'll be." He walked out. Rosalie stood very still for a moment. Then she went to the back storage room and looked at the left wall. The crack was exactly 2 feet long. She stood there looking at it for a long time, not because she needed to keep looking, but because something about the moment needed to be held for a second longer than normal. A stranger had walked into her store and seen in 30 seconds something she had been looking at for 3 weeks and not yet addressed. And he had told her, simply, without drama, without making it an event. She filed that away too. Then she went back to work. He returned 3 days later for his order, and something in the texture of the visit was immediately different. The first time, he had been a stranger reading a store. This time, he was someone who already knew the layout. The rhythm, the way the light came through the east window in the afternoon. He moved through the space with a naturalness that should have been forward, but wasn't. He collected his order, asked 2 practical questions about grain supplier reliability, and then paused at the door with the deliberateness she was beginning to recognize. "They're a decent place to eat in this town," he said. "Hendricks on Main. The stew is reliable. Pie's better than it has any right to be. Any chance you'd be willing to eat there Friday evening," he said. 6 o'clock, if you'd like to. The store went very quiet. Rosalie set down her pen. "Mr. Callahan," she said. "Wyatt." "Wyatt," she looked at him directly. "I want to be honest with you. I am not the kind of woman men in this town generally. I know what men in this town generally do," he said. Quiet. Steady. "I've been here 4 days and I've already heard things that would embarrass the people who said them." She held his gaze. "They talk fast in Willow Creek," she said. "They do," he said. 6 o'clock Friday. No obligation. He waited. It was the waiting that she noticed the absence of pressure in it. The complete patience. Most men who pushed past her first hesitation did it with a kind of desperate eagerness that felt like its own form of disrespect. Like they were trying to get their offer accepted before she had time to think clearly. This was different. This was a man standing at a door with genuine patience, offering something and meaning it, and equally prepared to be told no. 6 o'clock, she said. He nodded once, picked up his hat from the counter edge. Left. The bell above the door went still. Rosalie stood in the quiet and said, "To nobody, what are you doing?" It was not a question. It was a warning she was issuing to herself, from a part of her that had been burned before and remembered exactly how hot the fire ran. She talked herself out of Friday 4 separate times. Tuesday, she overheard 2 women on the boardwalk outside the dry goods store not lowering their voices. Because Willow Creek had never bothered with subtlety when judgment was available, saying that somebody ought to warn that Callahan man before he walked into something he couldn't understand. She kept walking, spine straight, eyes forward. Wednesday. Daniel Pruitt himself came into the store. He walked to her counter with the elaborate casualness of a man who has rehearsed looking relaxed, and stood there for a moment, arranging his expression. "Heard a new foreman's been coming around," he said. "Lots of people come to a supply store," Rosalie said. "That's generally the purpose of one. Rosalie, is there something you needed to purchase?" "Daniel?" The silence between them was the specific, pressurized silence of 2 people who have a great deal to say to each other, and both know that this is not the place for any of it. Daniel bought a box of nails he did not need. He left. Rosalie waited until the bell went quiet, then pressed both palms flat on the counter and breathed in slowly through her nose. "Good morning," she said to the empty store, testing the steadiness of her own voice. It was steady. Good. Thursday evening, her father looked at her across the dinner table with the particular perceptiveness that illness sometimes gives people, as though when the body releases its grip on things, the mind sharpens around what remains. "You seem like you're waiting for something." "Rosie," he said. "Just tired, Papa." "You're always tired," he said. "This is different." She did not answer. She refilled his coffee and changed the subject. And she felt his eyes on her for the rest of the meal, gentle and knowing and making no demands. Friday came. 2 hours before 6 o'clock, Rosalie stood in front of the small mirror in her room in her best-dressed deep blue. Well constructed. Sewn by her own hands because she had learned young that waiting for a world that didn't make clothing for her body was a reliable path to being perpetually underdressed and the voice that lived in the architecture of 30 years of. Accumulated evidence said everything it always said. He will look at you and see what they all see eventually. You are too much. You are going to get hurt. You know better than this. She stood there. She let the voice finish. Then she picked up her shawl, walked out the door, and went to Hendricks's on Main Street. Wyatt Callahan was already there. He stood when she came in, actually stood, pushed back his chair, and rose the way her grandfather had told her men used to do. The way she had stopped expecting, and the expression on his face when he saw her was simply, cleanly, unreservedly glad. No disappointment, no performance. No rapidly rearranged expression covering an initial reaction she wasn't supposed to catch. Just glad. She sat down across from him and held herself carefully, the way she always did in new situations, watchful. Measured, one hand already on the metaphorical door. "Tell me about the store," he said, "how it started." And she told him. She told him about her father hauling lumber from the mill 40 miles east. About learning to read the account books at 10, because she followed her father everywhere, and he never once told her she was in the way. She told him about her mother dying when Rosalie was 16, and how that was the year she understood that certain weight would fall on her, regardless of readiness. She told him about taking over the store at 26, about the 2 drought years, about the 3 ranchers she had refused to sell to for a full season until they understood she was serious. She talked for 20 minutes. Then she caught herself and stopped. "I'm sorry," she said. "You asked a simple question." "I asked because I wanted to know," Wyatt said. He didn't move to redirect the conversation or soften the moment with a joke. He just said it, flat and honest. "Those 3 ranchers. Were you scared when you cut them off?" "Terrified," she said. "But they were cheating me on price and counting on me not noticing. Or not caring. I noticed. I cared. What did they do?" "The first one waited 2 weeks and then came back and paid full price and never mentioned it again," she said. "The second one complained to my father, who was already ill by then. My father told him that his daughter ran the store now, and if he had a complaint he should take it up with her." A pause. "He never came back." "And the third?" Rosalie's mouth curved slightly. "The third one came in personally, hat in hand, and asked if I would consider reinstating his account. I told him I would consider it after he paid the 3 months of back pricing difference he owed me." She paused. "He paid." Something moved across Wyatt's face, not quite a smile, but honest amusement that he wasn't trying to contain. "You were 26, he said. 27 by then," she said. "It took almost a year. How'd you keep your nerve that long?" She thought about it honestly. "I couldn't afford not to," she said, "if I let the first one go. I let all of them go. And then I had no store. I had a charity operation." She looked at her coffee cup. "I was not willing to run a charity operation." Wyatt was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone thinking about what to say next, the quiet of someone sitting with something they've heard and finding it worth sitting with. "What about you?" she said, because she had been talking long enough, and because she was genuinely curious, and because asking questions was a form of armor she had learned to use. "You move a lot for a man who says he wants to stop." "I do," he said. "Why?" He turned his coffee cup in his hands once. A small, considered motion. "I trusted someone I shouldn't have," he said. "Cost me significantly. The ranch I'd been building toward for 6 years. Some money. Some other things. A pause that had weight to it. After that it was easier to keep moving than to try to care about a place again." "What changed?" she said. He looked up at her. He said, genuinely tired. "Not of the work. Of arriving somewhere new and having nobody know my name. Of being 36 years old and having nowhere that knows to miss me when I'm gone." He set the cup down. "That kind of tired doesn't get better with more moving." Rosalie looked at him across the lamp. "What was it?" she said. "The person who cost you. What did they do?" He was quiet for 3 full seconds. She counted them, waiting. "My foreman," he said finally. "Man I'd worked with for 4 years. He was siphoning money from the operation. When I found out and confronted him, he went to the ranch owner first with a story that put it on me." His jaw set slightly. "I couldn't prove it fast enough. Lost the position. The references, the stake I'd been building. Did he ever face consequences?" "Some," Wyatt said. Eventually. Not enough. I'm sorry, Rosalie said. I'm not telling you for sympathy, he said. I'm telling you because you told me something real. And it seemed wrong to answer with something polished. The restaurant moved around them. Plates and voices and the lamp burning steady between them. Rosalie looked at this man, this stranger, who had been in Willow Creek for a week and had already seen her storage wall crack and her account book precision and the 3 ranchers who eventually paid what they owed, and she felt something. She had trained herself to be very careful around hope, the specific fragile kind that comes when someone has been hurt enough times that hope itself becomes dangerous. She set her coffee cup down. Same time next Friday, she said. Wyatt looked at her. Same time next Friday, he said. She walked home alone in the clear Texas night, the summer stars excessive and somehow personal overhead, and she told herself firmly that this was probably nothing. That she was a grown woman who had survived worse than hope and could survive it again. That she should not attach meaning to dinners and honest conversation, an expression on a man's face, when he stood up because she walked into a room. She told herself all of that, and then underneath it, very small, very careful, like a flame in wind, but he didn't try to make me smaller. Not once, not even slightly. She let herself hold that thought for the length of the walk home. Just that, just tonight. The second Friday came and the third. And somewhere between the third and the fourth, something in the texture of Willow Creek shifted around them. Because Willow Creek was constitutionally incapable of watching anything develop between 2 people without forming a position on it. And positions formed fast in a town this size, and positions required expression. And expression in Willow Creek happened at a volume calibrated to be heard. It started, as these things always started, with the looks. Then it progressed to comments delivered within earshot on the boardwalk. Then it progressed to direct approach, which was the stage Rosalie knew was coming and had been, on some level, already braced for. She was crossing Main Street on a Wednesday morning, ledger under one arm, heading to the grain supplier's office, when Mabel Pierce stepped deliberately into her path. Mabel was 63 years old, had outlived 2 husbands and accumulated the specific confidence of a woman who had decided at some point that her opinion was a form of public service. Rosalie, she said, I think you and I should talk. Good morning. Mabel. I'm saying this as someone who has known you your whole life, Mabel said. I like you. I want what's best for you. I know you do, Rosalie said. What did you want to say, this Callahan man? Mabel folded her hands. He seems decent. He seems like a real decent man. And decent men deserve honest information before they get too deep into something they don't fully understand. Rosalie looked at her steadily. What information, she said. Honey. Mabel's voice dropped into the specific register of reluctant. Generous truth-telling, you are a lot. You know that. And men, even good men, eventually want easier, Rosalie said. Mabel blinked. I know the word, Mabel, Rosalie said. I've been hearing it my whole life. I had it said to me personally. By a man who then married someone else, 3 months ago. I am familiar with the concept. Her voice was level. Her hands were steady. Is there anything else? Mabel opened her mouth. Because I have a meeting at the grain office, Rosalie said. And I'm already running slightly behind. She walked on. Spine straight, eyes forward. She made it to the grain office. Conducted her meeting, negotiated a better quarterly rate than she had managed last year. And walked back to the store with her ledger under her arm, and the transaction complete and successful. Then she went into the back office, closed the door, sat in her father's chair, and pressed both hands flat on her knees. She breathed. She let herself acknowledge, in the privacy of the closed room, that it hurt, that it always hurt, that no amount of a straight spine and a steady voice and a completed transaction made it stop hurting, and that the hurt did not mean she was too much. It meant she was a person who had been told she was too much so many times that the words had worn grooves. She sat with it until it was manageable. Then she stood up and went back to work. The next morning, Wyatt came into the store without a supply list. He came directly to the counter, set his hat on the wood between them, and looked at her with an expression that was different from his usual, something under the steadiness of it that told her he was about to say something he had considered carefully. "You heard something yesterday," he said. "Word travels fast in Willow Creek." "It does," he held her gaze. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight. I don't generally answer any other way. The things they say about you," he said. "The things everyone is so determined to make sure I know. I'm not asking about their conclusions. I'm asking about what's underneath. Is there truth in any of it?" Rosalie held his eyes. "I am not easy," she said. "I have strong opinions and I express them. I have been running this store through conditions that would close most operations. And that has not made me gentle. I have been hurt and I haven't always managed it with grace." A pause. "Is that what you're asking?" "No," he said. "Then what?" He was quiet for exactly 1 second. "I'm asking if you're going to let what this town decides to say determine what this is," he said. Before we've had the chance to figure that out ourselves, the store was very quiet. Outside, Willow Creek moved through its morning wagons. Voices, the ordinary sound of a frontier town going about its work. Inside, Rosalie Bennett stood behind her father's counter and looked at Wyatt Callahan and felt the specific vertigo of a moment she would remember for the rest of her life. Even though it looked, from the outside, like nothing more than two people standing in a supply store having a conversation. "No," she said. "I'm not going to let them decide." Wyatt picked up his hat. "Good," he said. He headed for the door, stopped with his hand on the frame, the way he sometimes did. "Rosalie," he said without turning. "What?" "Those 3 ranchers," he said. "The ones who tried to cheat you on price." She waited. "Good for you," he said, and he walked out. Rosalie stood in the quiet after the bell went still. She thought about the cold ashes in the hearth. She thought about Daniel Pruett's face burning. She thought about Mabel Pierce on the boardwalk, and the word easier wearing grooves in her and 30 years of standing straight when every instinct said to collapse. She thought about a man who had been in this town for 2 weeks and had already seen the storage wall crack and the account book precision, and the 3 ranchers who paid eventually, and who had come in this morning without a supply list just to look her in the eye and ask her not to let other people decide what this was before they had the chance to find out themselves. And underneath all of her careful management of hope, underneath all of the warnings she had issued to herself and the evidence she had catalogued, and the flames she had watched consume everything she thought she knew about what she deserved, something answered. Something that had been very quiet for a very long time. Something that sounded, if she was honest, less like a question, and more like the beginning of a yes. The answer to that had begun forming in Rosalie's chest on that Wednesday morning, small and careful, and not yet fully named, had exactly 4 days to exist in peace before Willow Creek decided to test it. The testing came on Sunday. It came as most damage in small towns does. Not through any single catastrophic event, but through the slow, deliberate accumulation of small cruelties delivered by people who genuinely believed they were performing a public service. It started at church. Rosalie had attended First Baptist of Willow Creek every Sunday of her life, with the exception of the week her mother died, and the 2 weeks she herself had been sick with fever at 19. She sat in the 4th pew on the left side, same as always, in her good navy dress, with her hair braided and pinned. And she held her hymnal and sang, and listened to Reverend Coles deliver his weekly sermon. And for the first 30 minutes, everything was exactly as it had always been. Then the service ended, and the congregation moved outside into the summer heat, and the social portion of Sunday morning began that specific Willow Creek ritual of standing in loose clusters on the church steps and exchanging information under the guise of fellowship, and Rosalie understood within 4 minutes that she was the information being exchanged today. She could tell by the pattern of it, the way conversations shifted when she moved near them. The way certain women angled their bodies. The way certain men found somewhere else to look. She got herself a cup of the weak coffee the deacons always set out, and she stood near the steps and drank it and waited. Because she had learned long ago that the fastest way through this particular kind of social weather was straight through the middle of it. Clara Whitfield, Clara Pruett now, technically. Though the name still landed in Rosalie's chest like a small stone every time she thought it approached from the left with the expression of someone who has decided that a difficult conversation is a form of Christian duty. "Rosalie," she said. "You look well," Rosalie said. "Congratulations on your marriage." She meant it to land neutrally. She was fairly certain it did not land neutrally, but she held the coffee cup and held the eye contact and did not look away. "I wanted to speak to you," Clara said, lowering her voice to the register that in Willow Creek meant what I am about to say is for your benefit. "About the Callahan man." "Did you?" Rosalie said. "Daniel is concerned," Clara said. "He feels responsible. In a way, because of how things ended between you. He doesn't want to see you." A pause, carefully calibrated, hurt again. Rosalie looked at her for a long, measured moment. She said quietly, "That I appreciate his concern. And that he can stop carrying it. I am not his responsibility." She finished the last of her coffee. "I never was." She set the cup down on the deacon's table and walked to her wagon and drove home and did not let herself shake until she was inside with the door closed. Then she stood in the middle of her kitchen and pressed both fists against the counter and breathed through her teeth. Daniel was concerned. Daniel, who had told her she was too much and walked away and married someone else and was now, apparently, monitoring her subsequent life from a position of protective concern. She breathed. She counted. She got herself a glass of water and drank it. Then she did something she had not done in a long time. She went to the small cedar box, on the shelf above her bed, the box where she kept the things that mattered. The things she needed to remember when the world made it hard to remember, and she opened it and took out the letter her mother had written her the month before she died. She didn't read it. She had it memorized. She just held it for a moment, feeling the weight of the paper, the particular texture of her mother's handwriting pressing through the envelope. Her mother had written, "Rosalie, there will be people your whole life who believe that managing you is a form of love. It is not. Love does not require management. Love requires only that you be exactly and completely yourself and that you find, if you are lucky, someone brave enough to stand beside that." She held the letter until her hands steadied. Then she put it back in the box. Then she went downstairs and checked on her father and started the Sunday meal and kept going. Monday morning, Wyatt came in for a small supply run fence wire, primarily, and Rosalie was in the middle of a calculation when he arrived, which meant she had her back to the door and called out one moment without turning around, which meant she did not have time to arrange her face before she turned and he was already watching her. He saw something. She wasn't sure what exactly, but she could tell from the slight change in his expression, a careful attention that hadn't been there before, that he saw it. "Rough Sunday," he said. "Willow Creek Sundays," she said. "You'll get used to them." "What happened?" "Nothing that doesn't happen regularly," she said, and pulled the fence wire from the back shelf and set it on the counter. "It's the ordinary machinery of a small town. People feel entitled to opinions about other people's business. It runs on schedule." "Wyatt, I'm asking." "Because it matters," he said. "Not because I'm looking for something to get angry about." She looked at him across the counter. "Daniel Pruett's new wife came to tell me that Daniel is concerned about me," she said. "On account of our," she paused, just briefly, "history. And his apparent sense of ongoing responsibility for my welfare." Wyatt was quiet for a moment. "That man," he said, "has a remarkable amount of nerve." "He does," Rosalie agreed. "What did you say?" "I told her to tell him I appreciated the concern and he could stop carrying it." She tallied the fence wire order. "That seemed sufficient." "Was it sufficient?" Wyatt said. She looked up. He was watching her with the specific quality of attention she had come to recognize over the past weeks, not intrusive, not performative, just genuinely present. The kind of attention that asked a real question and was actually prepared to wait for a real answer. "No," she said honestly. "It was not sufficient. It was what I said in public. In private I was considerably less composed." "Good," he said. She blinked. "Good? You're allowed to not be composed about it," he said. "You don't have to be reasonable about everything." "Rosalie." She stared at him for a moment. Then she said, "You're an unusual man, Wyatt Callahan." "I'll take that," he said. He paid for the fence wire and picked it up and headed for the door. And then stopped the way he always stopped, that deliberate pause at the frame that she had started to, the way you anticipate a familiar melody, and said, "Friday, Friday," she said. He left. She stood at the counter for a moment after the bell went still. And she thought about what he had said, "You don't have to be reasonable about everything." And she felt the specific strangeness of being given permission for something she had been quietly denying herself for years. The right to feel the damage without immediately organizing it into something manageable. She filed that away carefully. In the same place she kept the things that mattered. Friday came with a heat that sat heavy on the town from before sunup. The kind of deep Texas summer heat that makes everything slightly slower and slightly more honest. And Rosalie arrived at Hendricks 5 minutes early, which she had told herself she would not do, and found Wyatt already there, which meant he had arrived earlier than 5 minutes early, and was not going to comment on it, which she appreciated more than she expected to. They were halfway through dinner, the reliable stew, and the pie that was better than it had any right to be, when the door to Hendricks's opened, and a group of men came in from a neighboring table's gathering that had apparently concluded outside. Loud with the particular loosened volume of men who had been drinking in the heat for several hours. Among them was Cole Hadley. Rosalie knew Cole Hadley the way she knew most things in Willow Creek thoroughly. Through long experience without illusion. He was 34. The son of one of the larger ranching families in the county. And he operated with the specific confidence of a man who had never been told no by anything that mattered to him, and had concluded from this that no was not a real option. He had asked Rosalie to dance at a community gathering 3 years ago. She had declined. He had not taken it especially well. And in the time since, he had made a secondary hobby of small, consistent cruelties, the kind that are too minor to formally object to, but accumulate over time into something that has genuine weight. He saw her from across the restaurant. She saw him see her. He said something to the man beside him, and the man beside him glanced at their table. And something in the glance told Rosalie exactly what was coming, and gave her approximately 4 seconds to decide how to hold herself for it. She straightened slightly, set down her fork. Cole Hadley crossed the restaurant with the loose, amiable gait of a man who had decided his mood was everyone's weather. "Well," he said, stopping beside their table. "Rosalie Bennett." His eyes moved to Wyatt with the specific assessment of a man taking inventory of a potential problem. "And you must be the new Dawson foreman. Heard you've been spending time in interesting company." "Cole Hadley," Rosalie said. Pleasantly. "I didn't realize you were dining here this evening." "Just came in," Cole said. His attention returned to her with the quality of someone examining something that both interests and amuses them. "You look well, Rosalie." "Considering what?" Wyatt said. His voice was entirely level, entirely quiet, but something in the quality of it shifted the temperature of the conversation by several degrees. Cole looked at him with the expression of a man recalibrating. "Just an expression," Cole said. "It's not an expression," Wyatt said. "It's an implication." "What are you implying?" Cole's smile stayed in place with the slight rigidity of something that was now working harder than it expected to. "Friendly conversation," Cole said. "That's all. No need to be sensitive about it." "I'm not sensitive," Wyatt said. "I'm asking you a direct question. What did you mean by considering?" The table nearby had gone quiet. Two men at the counter had turned to look. Rosalie's hand was flat on the table. Steady. Cole's smile thinned. Nothing meant by it, he said, with the clipped precision of a man deciding that exit was the better option. Just saying hello. Enjoy your evening. He walked back to his group. The restaurant readjusted. Conversations resumed. The ambient noise of the room came back up like water filling a space. Rosalie looked at Wyatt. He was looking at Cole Hadley's back with an expression that was very still and very focused. And then he seemed to make a decision, and the focus released. And he looked at Rosalie. "I'm sorry," he said. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry it happened. There's a difference." She looked at him across the lamp. "That happens regularly," she said. "Cole Hadley, others." "Not always that directly, but regularly." "How long?" Wyatt said. "Since I was about 15, she said, which is when I became a pause visibly myself. Wyatt was quiet for a moment. A real quiet, not the transitional kind. "Does it ever stop?" he said. She considered the honest answer. "It gets more manageable," she said. "You learn to stand differently inside it." "But no. I don't think it stops." He nodded slowly, like he was taking that in and deciding what to do with it. "Then I'll learn to stand differently inside it, too," he said. She stared at him. "What?" "If it doesn't stop," he said simply, "and you're going to keep encountering it, then I'm going to need to learn to handle it better than I handled it just now. I came in too hard. That could make things more difficult for you." "Not less." She kept staring. "You're thinking about how to handle it better," she said. "For my sake." "You're the one who lives here," he said. "I've been here 3 weeks. You know this town better than I do." "I should follow your lead." Rosalie sat with that for a moment. In 30 years of life in Willow Creek, through every man who had offered opinions about her, or apologized on behalf of others' behavior, or explained to her how she ought to feel about the things that happened to her, not one of them had ever sat across a table and said, "Tell me how to do this better, because you know more than I do." Not one. She picked up her fork. "Thank you," she said. Because that was all she had for a moment. "Don't thank me," Wyatt said. "Just tell me when I'm getting it wrong. You'll know," she said. "I'm not particularly subtle. I've noticed," he said. And this time the almost smile was a real one, brief and genuine. And she felt it land somewhere in her chest like a small, warm thing that had come in from the cold. She almost smiled back. Almost. She was still being careful. The following week introduced a new variable. And the new variable's name was Helen Marsh. Helen Marsh was 51 years old, owned the only millinery shop in Willow Creek, and had been Rosalie's mother's closest friend for 15 years before that woman died. She was one of the few people in town who had consistently, quietly, without announcement or expectation of recognition, treated Rosalie with uncomplicated respect. She came to the store on a Tuesday with a hat that needed a new ribbon and stayed for 2 hours. And within the first 20 minutes it was clear that the hat was not why she had come. "I'm going to say something," Helen said, from the other side of the counter, where she had settled herself comfortably into the chair Rosalie kept for long conversations. "And I want you to hear it as coming from someone who loved your mother and has watched you your entire life." "All right," Rosalie said. "He's a good man," Helen said. Rosalie kept her eyes on the ledger she was updating. "I don't know what you're Rosalie," Helen said. A pause. "Yes," Rosalie said. "You're being careful," Helen said. "I understand why. I've watched you be careful for 15 years. And I've understood why every single time." A pause. "But there is a version of careful that becomes its own kind of cage." Rosalie set down her pen. She looked at Helen. "I got burned, Helen," she said. "I know you did. Badly. I know that, too. And this town is watching every moment of this like it's entertainment," Rosalie said. "And if it goes wrong, it won't be his reputation that suffers. It will be mine. It is always mine." "Yes," Helen said. That is true, and it is deeply unfair, and it has always been unfair. She held Rosalie's gaze. And it is also true that he stood up in Hendrix's restaurant last Friday night and looked Cole Hadley in the eye in front of witnesses. That is not the behavior of a man planning to leave. Rosalie was quiet. Word travels fast, she said finally. It does, Helen said. With a ghost of a smile. In this case, I was glad it did. After Helen left, Rosalie stood at the front window of the store and looked out at Main Street and thought about cages. About the particular kind of cage you build yourself from good materials, caution, experience, the specific wisdom of someone who has been hurt and learned from it, and how the bars can be so well made that, by the time you realize they're bars, you've been inside for years. She thought about that for a long time. Then the next customer came in, and she went back to work. The days moved through their ordinary architecture store hours. Account books, her father's evening meals, the small, reliable rituals that kept a life structured. But something beneath the ordinary had shifted, imperceptibly at first and then less imperceptibly. And it was shifting in the specific direction of Wyatt Callahan. He came into the store 3 times that week, each time with a legitimate supply reason. Each time staying slightly longer than the supply reason required. She noticed. She catalogued it the way she catalogued everything precisely. Honestly, without embellishment. He asked about her father once. Genuine questions, not social noise. How long has he been ill? What does the doctor say? Is there help in the evenings? She answered honestly, which surprised her. She had been deflecting questions about her father's illness for 2 years, with the smooth efficiency of long practice. And she found that she did not deploy that efficiency with Wyatt. She told him that her father had good days and difficult days, and that the difficult days had been increasing, and that she managed the evenings alone because there was no one else to manage them, and that she was tired in a way that had stopped being about sleep some time ago. He listened to all of it. He did not offer solutions or silver linings. He did not reframe it into something more comfortable. He just listened with the quality of attention that made the speaking feel like it had somewhere to go. Is there anything I can do, he said, practically. Not as an offer of sympathy. Specifically, she almost said no out of pure reflex. The word was already formed. She stopped it. There's a section of the east fence on the property behind the store, she said slowly. It's been needing repair for 2 months, and I haven't had the time or the hands for it. Saturday morning, Wyatt said. I have the morning free. You don't have to Saturday morning, he said again. She looked at him. All right, she said. He showed up Saturday at 7 o'clock with tools she hadn't asked him to bring and didn't comment on the fact that she was already out there when he arrived. Having woken at 5 with the particular restlessness that came when something was actually going to happen, and she hadn't yet found a way to talk herself out of it. They worked side by side for 3 hours and talked through most of it not about anything weighted or significant. Just the ordinary conversation of 2 people doing physical work together, which has its own specific intimacy that is different from every other kind. She showed him where the fence had been weakest, longest. He showed her a reinforcement method she hadn't seen before. She disagreed with his assessment of one section and said so directly. And he considered it and conceded that she was right. And neither of them made anything of the moment. But she noticed it. She noticed because men did not generally concede to her directly and quietly and without a performance of generosity around it. They conceded with an air of I am choosing to allow this, which was its own form of not conceding at all. Wyatt just said, You're right, and adjusted. They finished the fence. They stood looking at it in the morning heat. Thank you, Rosalie said. Good fence, Wyatt said. Involuntary. Unguarded, the real kind. It came out before she could consider it. And once it was out, it was too late to reel it back. And she looked at him, and found him looking at her, with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. Not the almost smile. Something quieter than that. something that had no performance in it at all. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said, just he paused. "You don't laugh like that very often." "No," she said. "I suppose I don't. You should simply." Like a fact. She looked away first. They walked back toward the store. And the morning was very warm and very bright, and somewhere in the architecture of that walked the specific, unremarkable 200 steps between the back fence and the store's rear entrance. Something completed itself that had been building for weeks. She could feel it. She did not name it yet, but she felt it. The Monday after the fence, the first real trouble arrived. It did not announce itself. Real trouble in Willow Creek rarely did. It moved through the town's social body, the way weather moved through the valley. You didn't know it was fully upon you until you were already standing in it. It started at the bank. Rosalie had a standing monthly appointment with Marcus Webb at First Willow Creek Bank to review the store's accounts and service the small business loan she had carried for 3 years. Webb was 60, meticulous, and had always treated her with the formal correctness of a man who respected competent ledger work, regardless of who was doing it. This Monday, the meeting had a different quality from the start. Webb was slightly more careful with his words, slightly more deliberate in his pauses. "I want to ask you something," Webb said, halfway through the account review. "And I want you to understand I'm asking in my capacity as your account manager." "Go ahead," Rosalie said. "There are questions being raised," Webb said carefully, "about the stability of the store's operation going forward. In light of your father's deteriorating health," and he paused again. "Other developments." "What other developments?" Rosalie said. Webb cleared his throat. "There is a party interested in acquiring the Bennett property," he said, "including the store building and the supply business. They've approached the bank informally about financing." Rosalie went completely still. "Who?" she said. "I'm not at liberty to disclose that at this stage," Webb said. "But I felt you should be aware that who is trying to buy my store." "Marcus," she said. Her voice was level, her hands were in her lap. She was very, very still. Webb looked at her for a moment. "The offer came through Cole Hadley's family," he said. "His father, Elias Hadley." Rosalie sat with that for one long, measured moment. Elias Hadley, who owned more land in this county than anyone except possibly God, and who had been systematically acquiring struggling businesses along Main Street for the past 4 years, and whose son had stood in Hendrix's restaurant and said, considering with a smile that knew exactly what it was saying. "My store is not for sale," Rosalie said. "Of course," Webb said. "And there is no obligation. My store has never been for sale," she said. "It was not for sale when my mother died, and it was not for sale when my father became ill, and it is not for sale now." She held Webb's eyes. "I want that communicated clearly to Elias Hadley." In those words, "Rosalie, I would also like to review," she said, "whether my current account standing gives the bank any grounds to facilitate a transaction of this nature without my consent." Webb was quiet. "It does not," he said. "Good," she said. "Then we understand each other." She stood. She shook his hand. She walked out of the bank into the full heat of the Monday morning. And she stood on the boardwalk for a moment and looked down Main Street at the town she had been born in. The town she had run a business in for 4 years. The town that was apparently not done deciding what to do with her. She stood there. And then, very quietly, she said to no one, "All right then," because Rosalie Bennett had been keeping going since she was 16 years old. And she was not done yet, not even close. She went back to the store and she opened the ledger and she started to think. She needed to understand exactly what she was dealing with. She needed to know the full scope of what Elias Hadley was attempting, how long it had been in motion, and what leverage he believed he had. She needed allies who understood business law and land rights. And she needed them before Hadley moved from informal inquiry to formal pressure. She needed, she realized, to tell Wyatt, not because she needed him to fix it, She had spent enough years fixing things herself to know the difference between needing help and needing rescue. And she had no interest in rescue, but she needed to tell someone she trusted. And when she sat with that, when she let herself honestly examine it, she found that Wyatt Callahan had moved, somewhere in the past several weeks, into the category of people she trusted. Quietly, completely, without any single moment she could point to as the deciding one. Just gradually, the way dawn comes, not in instants, but in the slow, relentless accumulation of light, until you look up and it is unmistakably morning. She sent word to the Dawson spread that afternoon. He came the next morning. She told him everything. He sat across the counter and listened to all of it, without interrupting the bank meeting. Webb's careful language, Elias Hadley, the informal inquiry. The 4 years of property acquisitions along Main Street. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "How long has Hadley been watching this store?" he said. "I don't know exactly," she said. "Long enough to know about my father's health. Long enough to approach the bank." "He's not moving fast," Wyatt said. "That means he thinks he has time. He thinks pressures will come from another direction first and soften you up before he makes a formal offer." "What other direction?" she said. Wyatt looked at her steadily. "Your loan renewal," he said. "When does it come up?" 4 months, she said. "And if Webb makes the process difficult, not impossible. Just difficult, you'd be looking at either a significantly worse rate or a gap in your operating capital." She stared at him. "Marcus Webb," she said slowly. "I'm not saying he's dishonest," Wyatt said. "I'm saying he told you about Hadley's interest, which could be professional courtesy. Or could be the beginning of a negotiation." The store was very quiet. "You think Hadley got to Webb?" she said. "I think it's worth knowing," Wyatt said. "One way or another." Rosalie looked at the ledger on the counter in front of her, the ledger her father had started. The ledger she had continued, 4 years of numbers that represented every decision she had made and every load she had carried, and every morning she had opened this door regardless of what the night before had cost her. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at Wyatt. "I need a lawyer," she said. "I know one," he said. "In Abilene. Straight as they come. I worked a case with him 2 years ago when a ranch owner tried to defraud the hands on a land division. Can you reach him?" "By week's end," he said. She held his gaze. "Wyatt," she said. "Yes. I am not asking you to fight this for me." "I know you're not," he said. "I need resources and information," she said. "The fighting I'll do myself." He looked at her with the expression that had no performance in it, the quiet one. "The real one. I know," he said. "That's why I'm still here." And for the first time since Dottie Hanson had delivered devastating news across a dry goods counter and the photographs had burned in the cold hearth and 30 years of being told she was too much had pressed itself into her like a brand for the first time, Rosalie Bennett did not feel like she was keeping going alone. The lawyer's name was Samuel Greer, and he arrived from Abilene on a Thursday morning with a worn leather satchel, a handshake that meant business, and eyes that took in a room the way a man takes in a room when he has spent 20 years understanding that the most important information is rarely what people say first. He was 53, lean and deliberate, with the specific unhurried confidence of someone who had won cases that other lawyers had already declared lost. Wyatt had ridden to Abilene himself to fetch him, which told Rosalie something she filed away carefully, that Wyatt understood the difference between sending a letter and making something actually happen. They met in the back office of the store, the 3 of them, with the door closed and Rosalie's full 4 years of account ledgers spread on the table between them. Greer read for 40 minutes without speaking. Rosalie sat straight and watched him read, and did not fill the silence with nervous conversation, which cost her considerably because nervous conversation was one of her more reliable coping mechanisms, and she had deployed it successfully for years. She sat on her hands metaphorically and let the man read. Wyatt sat in the corner chair and was simply present in the way he was always simply present, without demanding anything from the room. without taking up more space than he needed, available if needed and unobtrusive if not. Finally, Greer set down the last ledger and looked at her. "Your books are immaculate," he said. "Yes," she said. 4 years of clean operation, no missed payments. Loan serviced on schedule. Supplier accounts current. He folded his hands on the table. "There is no legitimate financial grounds for a bank to complicate your loan renewal." "Not one." "But," she said, because there was clearly a but. "But legitimate grounds and actual practice are two different things," Greer said. "A bank manager with motivation can make a process slow, document-heavy, and psychologically exhausting without technically violating procedure. It is a form of pressure designed not to break you legally, but to break you personally." He paused. "Has Webb done or said anything since your Monday meeting?" "He sent a letter," Rosalie said. She pulled it from the desk drawer. "Yesterday." Greer read it. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "He's asking for additional documentation," he said. "Financial projections for the next 18 months. An updated asset assessment. A formal health certification for your father regarding his capacity to serve as co-owner." He looked up. "That last one. My father's name is still on the deed," Rosalie said quietly. "Because I never got around to formalizing the transfer." "That," Greer said, "is what Hadley is using." The room went completely still. "Explain," Wyatt said from the corner. His voice was very quiet. "If her father's name is on the deed and her father is demonstrably incapacitated," Greer said, "a sufficiently motivated party could argue that the store's ownership is in an ambiguous legal state. Not easily, not quickly, but the argument exists. And a bank manager who is already friendly with that party might use the ambiguity to justify delays, additional requirements, and ultimately, if pressure is sustained long enough, a technical default on the loan." Rosalie's hands were flat on the table. "He needs my father declared incompetent," she said. "He needs enough legal fog to make your position look uncertain," Greer said. "Which is not the same thing but serves the same purpose. Fog creates doubt. Doubt creates hesitation. Hesitation creates the window he needs." She looked at the letter from Webb sitting on the table. "How do I close the window?" she said. "Two things," Greer said. "First, we formalize the ownership transfer immediately. Your father signs the deed over to you cleanly, with witnesses and proper documentation, before Hadley can create any argument about capacity. Second, I draft a letter to Marcus Webb that makes clear, in precise legal language, that I am aware of the documentation requests. I have reviewed your account records in full, and any action by the bank that cannot be demonstrated as standard procedure for accounts of equivalent standing will be treated as coordinated interference and will be reported accordingly." "Will that stop him?" Rosalie said. "It will make him significantly more careful," Greer said. "Men like Webb are not courageous. They're opportunistic. Remove the opportunity, you remove the man." She looked at him steadily. "And Hadley himself." Greer met her eyes. "Hadley is a different problem," he said. "And I suspect a larger one than what's visible at the surface." He reached into his leather satchel and pulled out a folded document. "Wyatt asked me to look into the property acquisitions along Main Street before I came," Greer said. "I spent 2 days at the county recorder's office in Abilene." He set the document on the table. "Elias Hadley has acquired 7 properties along this street in the past 4 years," Greer said. 3 of them went through foreclosure. 2 went through what the records describe as voluntary sale under financial pressure. 1 went through a probate dispute that Hadley's lawyers became involved in." He paused. "The pattern is consistent. He identifies businesses with a vulnerable owner illness, debt, family instability, applies layered pressure over 6 to 18 months, and acquires the property at significantly below market value." Rosalie stared at the document. 7, she said. 7, Greer said. "Yours would be the 8th. She looked up. "Is any of this illegal?" she said. "Individually? Each transaction is defensible, Greer said. As a pattern, that is a more interesting question. One that, if the right people in the right positions began asking it loudly, might make Elias Hadley significantly less comfortable. Who are the right people? Wyatt said. The county land commissioner, Greer said, a regional judge I know in Abilene. And every business owner on this street who has watched their neighbor disappear and wondered if they were next. Rosalie sat back. She looked at the ledgers, the letter, the document with 7 names on it. She thought about the store her father built. She thought about 23 years of her life inside these walls. She thought about the morning she burned the photographs and told herself she was keeping going. And every morning since, when she had kept going again. And again and again. How long do we have, she said. Before he makes a formal move, Greer said. My estimate is 6 to 8 weeks. He wants the loan renewal process to create pressure first. Once that's in motion, he'll approach with an offer framed as a rescue. 6 weeks, she said. 6 weeks, he confirmed. She looked at Wyatt. He looked back at her with the steady brown that her mother had said was the most trustworthy color. And he said nothing, because he understood that this was not a moment that required his voice. All right, Rosalie said. She turned back to Greer. Let's start with my father's signature, she said. Her father's name was Thomas Bennett, and he had built the store when Rosalie was 7 years old, with lumber from a mill 40 miles east and the particular stubborn optimism of a man who believed that if you built something good and ran it honestly, the world would eventually recognize the value of it. He had been mostly right about that. He had also, over the past 2 years, lost most of the feeling in his left hand, developed a heart arrhythmia that the doctor managed with careful routine and strict instructions about exertion, and spent increasing portions of his days in the chair by the window of his upstairs room with a book in his lap and the look of a man who was making peace with something at his own pace and did not require anyone's assistance with the process. He was 71 years old and he was still on his good days. The sharpest person Rosalie knew. This was a good day. She brought Greer upstairs after the meeting and introduced them. And her father shook Greer's hand with his right hand, the one that still worked fully, and looked him over with the thorough, unhurried appraisal of a man who had been reading people for 7 decades. Wyatt Callahan sent you, Thomas said. He did, Greer said. Good man, Thomas said. He told him about the bank? Yes. Papa? Yes. Thomas was quiet for a moment. He looked out the window at Main Street below the street he had spent his working life on. The street where he had built the store that Rosalie now ran in the mornings, and he watched from the window in the afternoons. I should have transferred the deed 2 years ago, he said. It doesn't matter now, Rosalie said. We're doing it today. It does matter, Thomas said. He looked at her directly. I put you in a position. Rosie. I knew my health was going and I kept putting it off because he stopped. Because signing it over felt like letting go of something I wasn't ready to let go of. Papa, let me finish, he said. I made it harder for you than it needed to be, and I want to say that plainly. In front of a witness, before we do this. The room was very quiet. Rosalie looked at her father, at the man who had taught her to read account books and haul feed bags, and look people in the eye and keep going, who had told Daniel Pruitt's complaints to go speak to his daughter, because she ran the store now, who had looked at her across a dinner table and said, you seem like you're waiting for something, with a gentleness that saw everything. I know, Papa, she said. You've been carrying this alone, he said. Not entirely alone, she said, not anymore. Thomas looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked past her toward the doorway, and Rosalie turned and found Wyatt standing in the hallway, not intruding. Just present, the way he was always present, and Thomas looked at him with the expression of a man making an assessment that mattered. Come in, son, Thomas said. Wyatt came in. She tell you about the deed situation? Thomas said. Yes, sir, Wyatt said. And you brought the lawyer. He's the best I know, Wyatt said. Thomas nodded slowly. He looked at Wyatt for another long moment with those still sharp eyes. "You plan to stay in Willow Creek?" Thomas said yes. "Sir," Wyatt said. A pause. "Several," Wyatt said. Thomas looked at him. Then he looked at Rosalie. Then he almost smiled the same almost smile. She realized with a small shock that Wyatt had the same quality of amusement held carefully behind a composed face. "All right," Thomas said. "Get me the papers." The deed transfer was witnessed by Greer and by Helen Marsh, who Rosalie had sent for because her mother's closest friend deserved to be in the room when something this significant happened. And because Helen had been quietly holding pieces of Rosalie's life together for 15 years and deserved to see one of those pieces land somewhere solid. Helen cried a little, which she pretended was dust. Thomas signed with his right hand, steady and deliberate. And when it was done, he held Rosalie's eyes for a moment and said simply, "Yours," and she understood he meant more than the store. That afternoon, Greer sent the letter to Marcus Webb. The following morning, Webb replied. The additional documentation requests were withdrawn. The loan renewal would proceed on standard timeline and terms. Rosalie read the reply twice. Then she set it down on the counter. And she breathed, and she let herself acknowledge that one battle had been won before it fully began. And that winning it had required 4 people working together, and not one of them doing it alone. That was new. That was something she was still learning the shape of. The town meeting happened on a Friday evening, 12 days after Greer's visit. And it was not planned by Rosalie. It was called by Earl McIntosh, who, it turned out, had been watching Elias Hadley's acquisitions along Main Street with the narrowed, patient attention of a man who has been ranching long enough to recognize when something is being circled before it is taken. Earl had spoken to 6 other business owners. 6 of them had said yes. 3 of them had their own stories about pressure they had absorbed and filed away, and not spoken of publicly because in Willow Creek, certain powers were understood to be simply the whether something you endured rather than opposed. Earl, apparently, had decided the weather needed opposing. The meeting was held at Hendricks, tables pushed together. 8 business owners and their families and Greer, who had stayed in Willow Creek at Rosalie's request because she had a feeling his presence would be useful, and she was rarely wrong about these things. Rosalie arrived to find the room already half full, and she stopped just inside the door for a moment because she had genuinely not let herself expect this many people in a room. For this reason, Wyatt was already there. He stood when she came in. She had stopped being surprised that he stood when she came in. She sat beside him. Earl McIntosh opened the meeting with the economy of a man who believes that the purpose of words is to convey information and that any words beyond that quantity are wasted. "Most of you know why we're here," Earl said. "Elias Hadley has been buying this street piece by piece for 4 years. 7 properties. 3 of them through foreclosure he helped engineer. He's moving on the Bennett store now." Earl looked around the table. "I'm not willing to watch an 8th property go. I suspect most of you aren't either. So we're going to talk about what we're going to do about it." The room talked. It talked for 2 hours. Some of it was fear, the specific, practical fear of people who understand that opposing an entrenched local power has consequences and are honest about not being certain they can absorb those consequences. Rosalie respected that fear. She had felt it herself every morning for 4 years. Some of it was anger, the kind that had been accumulating quietly for a long time and was finding, in this room, a shape to organize itself around. And some of it, increasingly as the evening went on, was something else. Something more deliberate than anger and more sustaining than fear. Rosalie called it resolve. She had lived with it for years. She recognized it when she saw it in other people's faces. Marcus Tully, who owned the hardware store 2 doors down and had watched the dry goods store beside him go to Hadley 18 months ago, said, "I have 3 years of records showing Webb applied different loan standards to my account than to Hadley's business partners. I didn't know what to do with it. Now I do. Ellen Grady, who ran the seamstress shop on the east end of Maine and had received an unsolicited offer from a Hadley associate 6 months ago, said, I told them no. They came back twice. The third time the offer was lower than the first. That's not how legitimate buyers behave. James Corrigan, who had lived in Willow Creek for 40 years and remembered when the Hat family had owned half of what they currently owned and none of what they'd acquired in the past decade, said, there's a pattern here. We can document it. And documented patterns have a way of becoming very uncomfortable for the people at the center of them. Greer spoke for 20 minutes about what a legal challenge would require, what it could achieve, what it realistically could not achieve, and what the process would cost in time and money and community nerve. He did not soften any of it. He presented it the way he presented everything, clearly, completely, without false comfort. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Rosalie said, I want to be clear about something. Every head at the table turned. This started with my store, she said, and I understand if that makes some of you hesitate. I am aware that my position in this town is complicated. She did not look away from any of them. I am also aware that 7 properties and 7 families represent something larger than my store or my situation. If we do this, we do it for all of those families. Not for me. We're doing it for the street, Earl said. Yes, she said. She looked at Greer. What do we need to start? She said. Sign statements from each property owner detailing their interactions with Hadley's representatives, Greer said. Every conversation, offer, and instance of pressure. Dates, names, amounts, everything. How long to gather that, she said. If everyone in this room starts tomorrow, he said. 2 weeks. She looked around the table, one by one. Every person in the room nodded. Earl McIntosh, who communicated primarily in hat angles and single syllables, said 2 weeks, and that was that. Walking home that night, Rosalie and Wyatt went alone, which had stopped being noteworthy in her internal accounting sometime in the past weeks. The transition happening so gradually that she had not been able to identify the precise moment it became simply the way things were. The night was clear and warm, the summer stars doing their usual excessive work overhead. You said something in there, Wyatt said. I said several things. The part about your position in this town being complicated, he said. You said it plainly, in front of all of them. It's true, she said. I know it's true, he said. I'm saying it took something to say it that directly. She walked in silence for a moment. It would have taken more to pretend it wasn't, she said. He made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite admiration, but somewhere between the two and possibly something else entirely. She noticed it. She filed it away. They were 2 streets from the store when Wyatt stopped walking. She stopped too, and turned, and found him looking at her with the expression that had no performance in it, the quiet one. The real one, the one she had first seen over a fence that needed repairing. Rosalie, he said. He was quiet for a moment. She could see him deciding something. I need to tell you something, he said. And I need you to hear it as information, not as pressure. Because the last thing I want to do is put weight on you in the middle of all of this. She looked at him. Tell me, she said. I came to Willow Creek because Henry Dawson needed a foreman, he said. That's true. But I also came because Dawson told me it was a town with good bones. Good people. A place a man could actually stay. He paused. He also, in passing, mentioned the Bennett supply store and the woman who ran it, and described her as the most capable person on Main Street and possibly in the county. Rosalie was very still. Henry Dawson said that, she said. He did, Wyatt said. And then I walked into your store, hauling a feed bag, and you had the account books laid out to the penny, and you saw the storage room crack before I mentioned it. You just hadn't had the time to address it. I hadn't had the time, she said. I know, he said. Rosalie, he stopped. He tried again. I am telling you that I did not stumble into this. I am here on purpose, and I want you to know that. So that nothing that happens in the next 6 weeks looks like coincidence to you. Because it isn't. The night was very quiet around them. Somewhere down the street a dog barked once, and then went still. Rosalie looked at this man who had been in her store for 30 seconds and seen a crack in her storage wall and told her about it simply. Without drama, who had conceded that she was right about the fence section without making it an event. Who had sat in her father's room and been called son and answered every question directly. Who had built a meeting room full of resolve out of 6 weeks of quiet. Consistent presentness. She looked at him. You came here on purpose, she said. I did, he said. And the things you told me, she said carefully. At dinner. About the foreman who cost you. About being tired of arriving somewhere new. Were those true, he said, every word. I wasn't constructing a story. Rosalie, I was telling you who I am, she breathed. I'm going to need some time, she said, to sit with that. I know, he said. There's a lot happening right now. I know that, too, he said. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just asking you to know. She looked at him for a long moment. I know, she said. They walked the rest of the way to the store, in a silence that was not empty. She went inside. He waited until the lamp came on in the upstairs window. She didn't know he was waiting. But she found out later that he was, and then he walked back to the Dawson spread in the clear Texas night. 2 days later, the second twist arrived. It arrived in the form of a man Rosalie had never seen before. 50s. City clothes, the bearing of someone accustomed to delivering news that changes rooms, who walked into the store at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday morning and asked for Rosalie Bennett by full name. I'm Rosalie Bennett, she said. My name is Arthur Vance, he said. I'm a land attorney from San Antonio. I represent a client who has asked me to deliver some information to you directly and in person. He reached into his satchel and set a document on her counter. The client wished to remain anonymous until you had reviewed the material. She picked it up and began reading. She read for 3 minutes. The color drained from her face. Then came back. Then something happened in her expression that was not quite shock and not quite fury and not quite relief, but contained elements of all three. Organized around a core of something very cold and very focused. She set the document down. Who is your client, she said. Vance reached back into his satchel. He set a second document on the counter. She looked at the name at the top. She looked up at Vance. How long has he known, she said. Approximately 18 months, Vance said. He hired me shortly after the 3rd Main Street acquisition. He has been building the evidentiary record since then. Rosalie stared at him. He's been collecting evidence against Hadley for 18 months, she said. And he didn't come forward. He had his reasons, Vance said carefully. Which he would like the opportunity to explain to you, personally. If you're willing. Who is he? Wyatt said. He had come through the back door while Vance was speaking. She had sent for him when the city clothes man first walked in. Because she had learned to trust her instincts about when things were about to change, and he was standing inside the back doorway with his hat in his hands and his eyes on the second document. Rosalie looked at him. She picked up the document and read him the name at the top. Wyatt went completely still. That's impossible, he said. Apparently not, she said. She put both documents flat on the counter and pressed her palms on them and looked at Vance and said, very clearly and very steadily, tell your client I will see him. Tomorrow morning. Here. Vance nodded. He picked up his hat. He left. The store was very quiet. Wyatt crossed to the counter and looked at the name on the second document. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. Did you know, he said. No, she said, not even slightly. Are you all right, he said. She thought about it honestly. I don't know yet, she said. Ask me tomorrow. He looked at her. I'll be here. I know, she said. And for the first time since the documents landed on her counter and rearranged everything she thought she understood about the past 18 months, for the first time since a name she had not expected appeared at the top of a legal document and made the ground shift under everything she had built, she felt steady. Not because the ground had stopped shifting, but because she was not standing on it alone. The name on the document was Henry Dawson. Rosalie had spent the night with that fact the way you spend a night with something that doesn't fit anywhere in the architecture of what you thought you knew, turning it over, holding it to different angles, looking for the place it was supposed to go, and finding instead that it required rebuilding several walls entirely. Henry Dawson, 73 years old, the man who had brought Wyatt Callahan to Willow Creek, the man whose spread sat east of town and whose ranch accounts had been among Bennett's Supply's most reliable for 15 years, going back to when Rosalie's father still ran the floor. The man who had described Rosalie to Wyatt, before Wyatt ever set foot in her store, as the most capable person on Main Street and possibly in the county. The man who had been quietly, methodically building a legal case against Elias Hadley for 18 months without telling a single person in Willow Creek. She opened the store at 7, same as always. She moved through the morning inventory with the automatic efficiency of long practice. She answered 2 customer questions and processed 1 supply order and updated 3 entries in the ledger. And she did all of it with the surface competence that had gotten her through every difficult morning of the past 4 years, while her mind worked the problem underneath. By 8:45, she had arrived at the only question that actually mattered. Why now? Wyatt arrived at 8:50. He came through the front door, not the back, which meant he had come from town rather than from the Dawson spread, which meant he had not gone back last night, which she had not known and now did. And filed away without comment, he looked at her. "You slept," he said. It was not a question. "You?" "Some," he said. They stood on opposite sides of the counter in the early morning quiet of the store. And the particular quality of that quiet familiar now, comfortable in the way that only things you have inhabited for a while become comfortable, steadied her more than she expected. "Are you ready?" he said. "I don't know what I'm ready for," she said honestly. "But I'm here." The bell above the door rang at precisely 9 o'clock, and Henry Dawson walked in. Rosalie had seen Henry Dawson perhaps a dozen times in her life at the store, at community gatherings, once at a land commission meeting her father had brought her to when she was 12. He had always been the kind of man who occupied rooms quietly and thoroughly, the way well-rooted things occupy the ground they grow in. Age had settled into him without diminishing him. He moved with a slight deliberateness now that was new, a careful economy that spoke of a body being managed. But his eyes, when they found hers, were completely clear. He stopped inside the doorway. He looked at Rosalie. He looked at Wyatt. He said, "I owe you both an explanation. I'd like to sit down if that's all right." Rosalie gestured to the back office. They sat Henry across the small table from Rosalie, Wyatt in the corner chair that had become, over the past weeks, something close to his chair, and Henry set his hat on the table and folded his hands on top of it and looked at Rosalie with the directness of a man who has decided that the only way through a difficult thing is straight through the middle. "I've known about Hadley's pattern for longer than 18 months, Henry said. "Closer to 3 years. The room went very still. 3 years, Rosalie said. "I became aware of it when James Whitmore lost the feed operation on the south end of town," Henry said. "I knew James. I knew his books were solid. The foreclosure made no sense unless someone was engineering the conditions for it." He paused. "I started looking. I hired Vance quietly. And the more I found, the more I understood that moving too early would only warn Hadley and let him bury the evidence." "So you waited," Rosalie said. "I waited," he said, "until I had enough to make the case airtight. Not just persuasive airtight." He held her gaze. "I understand that waiting has a cost. I am not unaware of what these past months have been for you." Rosalie looked at him steadily. When did you know he was moving on my store? She said. 4 months ago, Henry said, when he approached Webb. The silence in the room had a specific texture now, the kind that precedes something that is going to require careful handling. You knew 4 months ago, she said, and you sent Wyatt to Willow Creek. Henry was quiet for exactly 1 moment. I sent Wyatt because I needed a foreman, he said. That part is entirely true. My operation needed reorganizing, and Wyatt is the best man I know for it. He paused. I also knew that if Hadley was moving on the Bennett store, you were going to need someone in your corner who understood land schemes and legal pressure and had the disposition to stand in one place and not be moved. He looked at Wyatt briefly. Then back at Rosalie. I did not tell Wyatt any of this. I told him about the foreman position and about the store and about the woman who ran it. What he did with that information was his own decision. Rosalie looked at Wyatt. Wyatt looked at her. I didn't know, he said. I want to be clear about that. I knew he thought highly of you. I didn't know about Hadley. I didn't know about the plan. She held his eyes for a moment, reading him the way she read everything carefully. Honestly, without the softening lens of wanting something to be true. He was telling the truth. She turned back to Henry. You used us both, she said, not as an accusation. As a fact set on the table between them to be examined. I put two people I trusted in proximity to each other, and a problem I needed solved, Henry said. That is a version of what you said, yes. And if it had gone wrong, she said. If Wyatt and I had not, if the relationship between us had not developed the way it did. If I had been worse at defending myself, or he had been less present, or Hadley had moved faster than you anticipated, then I would have intervened directly, Henry said. I was not going to let Hadley take this store. I was prepared to step in as a named party in the legal challenge regardless of any other factor. What I hoped was that by the time direct intervention was necessary, you would already have built something strong enough to not need it. He paused. I was right about that. More right than I expected. And faster. Rosalie sat with that. She thought about the morning she had burned the photographs. She thought about the first Friday dinner and the 4 times she had almost talked herself out of it. She thought about the fence on Saturday morning and Wyatt saying, "You're right," without ceremony. And her father saying, "Son," and the meeting at Hendricks where a room full of people found their resolve. She thought about all of it having been, at least in part, arranged. I need to ask you something, she said. And I need you to answer me straight. Yes, Henry said. Wyatt, she said. What you told him about me, before he came. How much of what happened between us do you think was his own decision, and how much was shaped by what you said? Henry looked at her for a long moment. I told him you were the most capable person on Main Street, he said. I told him the town had treated you poorly, and that was the town's failure. Not yours. I told him you were worth knowing. He paused. I did not tell him to court you. I did not tell him to eat dinner with you on Fridays, or repair your fence, or come into your store without a supply list to tell you not to let this town decide what the two of you were. He held her gaze. Those were his decisions, every one of them. She looked at Wyatt. Wyatt looked back at her. Rosalie? She said. Let me think for a minute. She stood up and walked to the small window in the back office that looked out over the storage yard. And she stood there with her back to both of them, and she thought. She thought about what Henry had done, the calculation of it, the patience of it, the presumption of it. She thought about the parts of the past several weeks' Vite that had been real, and the parts that had been arranged, and whether those two categories were actually as separate as they felt. She thought about her mother's letter. Love does not require management. Love requires only that you be exactly and completely yourself. She thought about Wyatt, who had been in this town for 2 weeks before he walked into Hendricks's, and looked genuinely glad she was there. Who had conceded about the fence without making it an event. Who had come in without a supply list to tell her not to let the town decide. who had stood at the counter last night with his hat in his hands after the documents arrived, and said, "I'll be here with specific simplicity of a man who meant it as a permanent statement and not a temporary one." She thought Henry Dawson put two people in proximity. He did not put that expression on Wyatt's face. He did not make Wyatt stand when she walked into a room. He did not make any of it feel the way it felt. She turned around. She looked at Henry. "You should have told me," she said. "Not because it would have changed the outcome, but because I had the right to know I was being protected. I've been managing my own protection for 30 years, and I was entitled to know someone else had taken a position on it." "Yes," Henry said. "You're right, I'm sorry." The apology was clean and direct and undecorated with justification. She received it the same way. "All right," she said. She sat back down. "Tell me the rest. Everything Vance has built. Everything we have against Hadley. I want to understand the full picture." Henry reached into his jacket pocket and produced a full document she recognized as a companion to the one Vance had delivered yesterday. "Vance has documented evidence of coordinated financial pressure across 7 properties," Henry said. "He has sworn statements from 2 former associates of Hadley's men who participated in the pressure campaigns and subsequently had their own disputes with him and are now willing to testify. He has correspondence between Hadley and Webb going back 14 months that demonstrates the coordination was deliberate and organized." Rosalie stopped. "He has correspondence between Hadley and Webb," she said. "Written letters," Henry said, "delivered through a third party, which is how Hadley operated to maintain distance. The third party in question had a crisis of conscience approximately 6 months ago and brought the letters to Vance." Rosalie stared at him. "Marcus Webb is in those letters," she said. "By name," Henry said. "Discussing specific accounts, including yours." The rage that moved through her was clean and cold, and she managed it without letting it take over. Which cost her something, but which she considered worth the cost. "What does the correspondence say about my account specifically?" she said. Henry looked at her steadily. "Webb agreed to apply additional documentation pressure to your loan renewal in exchange for Hadley's agreement to direct all future ranch supply purchases for his properties to a different supplier," Henry said. "A supplier in which Webb has a financial interest." Rosalie was very still. "He was going to redirect my ranch accounts," she said, "while simultaneously making my loan renewal difficult. Pressure from both sides." "Yes," Henry said. "While my father's name on the deed gave Hadley a legal argument for ownership ambiguity." "Yes. And Cole Hadley's appearance at Hendricks was not accidental. Cole reports to his father," Henry said. "The appearance was likely instructed, a show of presence. A reminder of what was watching." She thought about Cole Hadley saying, considering with that thin smile. And Wyatt looking at his back with the very still, very focused expression, and the table going quiet around them. "Wyatt was not supposed to be there," she said slowly. "No," Henry said. "I believe Cole expected to find you dining alone." She looked at Wyatt. "That's why he recalibrated," Wyatt said. "He wasn't prepared for a witness. Especially not one who asked him a direct question. He was testing how isolated I was," Rosalie said. "Yes," Henry said. She let that sit for a moment. "What happens now?" she said. "Vance files with the county land commissioner and the regional court simultaneously," Henry said. "The correspondence between Hadley and Webb goes into the public record. The sworn statements from his former associates go in. The documented pattern across 7 properties goes in." He paused. "And every business owner who signed a statement at Earl McIntosh's meeting becomes part of a coalition that is very difficult for one man's influence to suppress." "Timeline?" she said. "Vance files Friday," Henry said. "The formal hearing will likely be scheduled within 30 days. Hadley will know by end of week that the case exists and what it contains. What will he do when he finds out?" Rosalie said. "Retreat," Henry said. "Men like Hadley are not fighters. They are engineers of other people's weakness. When the weakness is removed and the engineering is exposed, They retreat and wait for the next opportunity elsewhere. He paused. Our goal is to make elsewhere as uncomfortable as possible. That requires the regional authorities to take the pattern seriously and open their own inquiry. Will they? She said. With the documentation Vance has, Henry said. Rosalie looked down at the documents on the table. She thought about 7 properties, 7 families. 15 years of Elias Hadley moving through this county like weather. Taking what he wanted from people who didn't have the resources or the information or the coalition to stop him. What about Webb, she said. Henry's expression shifted slightly. That depends on whether he cooperates with the inquiry, he said. If he provides full disclosure and testimony against Hadley, the commissioners may consider leniency. If he attempts to conceal, Henry paused, the letters make concealment very difficult. I want him removed from my accounts, Rosalie said. That can be arranged before the filing, Henry said. I have a relationship with the regional bank examiner. A formal request, supported by the correspondence, will be sufficient. She nodded, she said. Then I have one more question, and then I'd like you to excuse yourself so Wyatt and I can talk privately. Henry looked at her with the expression of a man who respects directness and is not surprised by it. Ask, he said. My store, she said, after this is done. After Hadley retreats and Webb is removed, and the inquiry opens, and the 7 families have their statements in the record. My store, it goes back to being mine. Completely mine. No arrangement, no debt, no obligation to anyone's strategy. Yes, Henry said. Say it plainly, she said. Your store is yours, Henry said. It was always yours. Nothing I have done changes that. Nothing anyone has done changes that. She held his eyes for a moment. Then she said, thank you for protecting it. Even if the method required renegotiation. Henry picked up his hat. Your mother would have done the same thing in my position, he said quietly. She was that kind of woman. Rosalie went very still. You knew my mother, she said. Margaret Bennett was one of the finest people I've known in 73 years, Henry said. She made your father promise, the year before she died, that if anything ever threatened the store, he would call on me. He put his hat on. Your father was too proud to call. So eventually I called on myself. He walked out. The back office was very quiet for a long moment after the bell above the front door settled. Then Wyatt said, Are you all right? My mother asked Henry Dawson to protect this store, she said. Yes. 15 years ago, yes. She sat with that for a moment that required its own space and its own silence, and she did not try to organize it into something manageable, because some things deserve to remain large for a while. Then she looked at Wyatt. He didn't tell you, she said. No, he said. I came to Willow Creek for a foreman position, and because an old man told me a woman on Main Street was worth knowing. He paused. That's all I had, and the rest of it, she said. Everything that happened after. The dinners. The fence. Coming in without a supply list. All of it mine, he said. Every decision, every morning I came in, every Friday mine. She looked at him across the small table. I need to tell you something, she said. He waited. I have spent 30 years being told I was too much, she said. Too big, too independent, too difficult, too complicated. I built walls around that fact the way you build walls around anything that keeps getting damaged high and solid and requiring significant effort to get past. She paused. I am aware that I have not made any of this easy. No, he said. You haven't. And I am aware that what Henry did, the arrangement of it, gives you grounds to question whether any of this was real. Whether you were positioned rather than drawn. I know what I was, Wyatt said. I know the difference. I know you do, she said. I'm not questioning it. I'm acknowledging that you could. And that you're not. He was quiet for a moment. Rosalie, he said. The morning I came into the store without a supply list and told you not to let the town decide what this was, I came in because I'd spent the night before thinking about you and realized I was tired of being careful. About something I was certain of, he held her gaze. Henry Dawson didn't give me that night. That was mine, she breathed. All right, she said. All right, he said. Don't push it, she said. I'm getting there. Something happened at the corner of his mouth that was almost entirely a smile. Take your time, he said. The week that followed operated on two levels simultaneously. The way significant weeks often do on the surface. The ordinary machinery of the store and the town and the daily work of keeping things going. Underneath. The gathering momentum of something that had been building for 18 months and was about to break into the open. Vance filed on Friday. By Saturday morning, the filing was public record. By Saturday afternoon, Willow Creek knew. The town's response had the specific, energetic quality of a place that has been holding a collective breath for a long time and has finally been given permission to exhale. At the general store, at the church steps, at the hitching posts along Main Street. People who had watched the Hadley acquisitions with private unease for years found themselves in sudden, voluble conversation about what they had seen and what it meant and what should happen now. Earl McIntosh came into Bennett's Supply at 9 Saturday morning and set a piece of paper on Rosalie's counter. 12 signatures, he said. People who want to add statements to the record. Not from the meeting. New ones. She looked at the list. 12, she said. Word got out about the web correspondence, Earl said. People who thought they'd just had bad luck with the bank are reconsidering. She looked at the names. People she had known her whole life. People who had watched her from a distance for years with that particular combination of sympathy and discomfort that the town reserved for women, it had decided, were too much. Some of them were on this list. Send them to Greer, she said. He's staying through the hearing. Earl nodded. He picked up the fence wire he had come in to actually purchase and headed for the door. He stopped. He turned. Your father would be proud, he said. Then he left. Rosalie stood behind the counter for a moment with that sentence and let it be what it was. The Monday of the following week brought Cole Hadley, which she had expected. What she had not expected was that he came alone, without the loose, amiable confidence of a man backed by his father's money and the town's deference. And he looked, for the first time in Rosalie's memory, like a man who understood that the ground had shifted and he was on the wrong side of the shift. He came to the counter. He did not try to smile. My father wants a meeting, he said. With you and your lawyer. Tell your father my lawyer handles all meeting requests, she said. He can contact Greer directly. Rosalie, was there something you needed to purchase? Cole, she said. He looked at her with something that was not quite contrition and not quite respect, but was in the territory between them, which was farther than he had ever traveled before. I didn't know about the web arrangement, he said. I want you to know that. She looked at him steadily. It doesn't change anything, she said, but I hear you. He left. Wyatt had been present in the back and came to the counter when Cole was gone. You believe him? He said, about not knowing the web specifics. Possibly, she said. It doesn't alter the pattern. But it's worth noting. Why? She thought about it. Because if Cole Hadley is separating himself from his father's methods, she said, it tells us something about how Elias Hadley's own circle is reading the situation. Wyatt looked at her with that particular expression. You're already thinking about the hearing, he said. I've been thinking about the hearing since Friday, she said. Of course you have, he said. The formal hearing was scheduled for 4 weeks out. In the county seat at Abilene, before a regional judge that Greer described as incorruptible and methodical and thoroughly unimpressed by family names. In those 4 weeks, 3 things happened that nobody had planned for. The first was that Marcus Webb submitted a full written disclosure to the regional bank examiner, naming Hadley, documenting every communication, and requesting consideration for cooperation. He did it without being formally asked, which meant he had understood. Upon reading the filing, that the correspondence made denial impossible and cooperation was his only viable path. Rosalie read the disclosure when Greer forwarded it to her. She read every page. When she finished, she set it down and was quiet for a long time. "He was going to take my accounts," she said. "Yes," Greer said. "While simultaneously making my loan impossible to renew." "Yes." "For a financial interest in a competing supplier." "Yes." She looked at the disclosure. "I want his name in the public record," she said. "Not protected." "In the record. That is already the case," Greer said. "The disclosure becomes part of the filing." "Good," she said. The second thing that happened was that 2 of the 7 families who had lost properties to Hadley came forward, having heard about the filing through the regional grapevine, and contacted Greer directly. Both had documentation of their own. One had a letter from a Hadley associate that was, according to Greer, the single most direct piece of evidence of intentional fraud in the entire case. Greer, when he called Rosalie to tell her, sounded like a man who had just been handed something rare. "This changes the hearing from a pattern case to a direct fraud case," he said. "Against specific named parties, with a named victim." "What does that mean for the outcome?" she said. "It means Hadley cannot retreat quietly," Greer said. "It means this follows him." The third thing that happened, nobody planned for because nobody could have. It was a Thursday evening, 3 weeks before the hearing, and Rosalie was closing the store. She was updating the last ledger entry of the day, the store empty around her, when the back door opened and her father came through it. He had not come downstairs to the store floor in 4 months. He was moving carefully, one hand on the doorframe, the other at his side, and he was fully dressed in clothes, which he wore for church and important occasions. She was off her stool and across the room before she had consciously decided to move. "Papa, what are you? You should not be." "I'm fine," he said. He was slightly breathless from the stairs, but his eyes were clear. "I wanted to see the store, Papa." "Rosalie." His voice was gentle and firm in equal measure. "Let me see my store." She steadied him. She walked him slowly to the front counter, the counter she had sanded and refinished herself, the counter where she had tallied 10,000 transactions, and she let him lean against it and look around the space against he had built and she had kept, and that neither of them was going to let go of without a fight. He looked for a long time. "You fixed the east wall," he said. "2 years ago," she said. "And the floor near the window." He nodded slowly. "It looks right," he said. "It looks like it should." She stood beside him and said nothing, because nothing was required. After a while he said, "The Callahan boy." "Yes," she said. "He's staying." "He says so," she said. "You believe him?" She thought about it, the way she thought about everything, carefully. "Honestly, I do." Her father nodded. "Good," he said. And then, after a pause, "Your mother would have liked him." Henry Dawson said she asked him to protect the store, Rosalie said quietly. "She did," Thomas said. "She also told me the last month she was alive that the only thing she worried about for you was that the world would make you so good at carrying things alone that you'd forget you were allowed to put things down." He looked at her. "She wanted you to find someone you could put things down with." Rosalie stood very still. "She said that," she said. "Clear as anything," Thomas said. She breathed. "I'm working on it, Papa," she said. "I know you are," he said. "I'm watching." She walked him back upstairs, slowly, carefully, and settled him in his chair by the window with his book and his lamp and the view of Main Street below. She stood in the doorway of his room for a moment and looked at him, this man who had built a store and taught her everything that mattered and signed his name on a deed with a steady right hand and said "yours" and meant more than a building. "Good night, Papa," she said. "Good night, Rosie," he said. "Go put something down." She went back downstairs. Wyatt was sitting on the front steps of the store, which she had not expected, and which meant he had been there for some time. Long enough for the evening to have settled fully around him. She sat down beside him. He did not ask about her father. He understood, she thought, the difference between presence and interrogation. They sat in the warm evening quiet. After a while, she said, "My mother told my father she worried I'd get so good at carrying things alone that I'd forget I was allowed to put them down." Wyatt was quiet. "What do you want to put down?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "The part where I'm waiting for you to realize I'm too much," she said. "I'd like to put that down." He turned and looked at her in the evening light. "Then put it down," he said. "Right done." She looked at him. "Just like that," she said. "Just like that," he said. "I've known who you are since the second time I came into this store. The only thing I've been waiting for is for you to believe I mean it." She breathed. In, out, and something she had been carrying for 30 years, something so long held that she had stopped noticing the weight of it shifted. Not gone entirely. Not yet, but lighter, in the specific way that things become lighter when someone you trust has taken hold of the other end. "I believe you," she said. The evening was very quiet around them. The stars over Willow Creek were beginning their usual excessive personal display. Wyatt Callahan reached over and took her hand, not urgently, not dramatically, just steadily, the way he did everything, and held it in the warm Texas night. And Rosalie Bennett, who had carried things alone for 30 years and kept going through every morning that cost her, and rebuilt every wall that fell, and refused to close her store, and refused to sell her store, and refused to stop standing straight, even when every part of her wanted to collapse, Rosalie Bennett let him. The morning of the hearing, Rosalie woke at 4:45 and lay in the dark for exactly 3 minutes before she got up. She had slept in pieces 2 hours here, 90 minutes there. The kind of sleep that skims the surface of rest without ever going deep enough to actually restore anything. She had lain awake between the pieces and listened to the quiet of the building around her. The store below, and her father sleeping down the hall, and the particular quality of the Texas dark before dawn. And she had not been afraid exactly. Fear was too simple a word for what she felt. It was more like standing at the edge of something large, knowing you were about to step off and being uncertain not whether you would fall, but whether the landing would hold. She dressed in the dark, her best dress, not the blue one this time, but the gray one she had made last spring, precisely fitted. The one that made her feel, when she put it on, like someone who understood the full extent of her own capability and was not apologizing for any of it. She braided her hair. She looked at herself in the small mirror. She said, out loud, to the woman looking back, "You built this. All of it. Today you just let people see it." Then she went downstairs and started the coffee. Wyatt arrived at 5:30, which meant he had been awake considerably earlier than that, and had not said so. Which she had come to understand was his particular form of consideration, doing the things that needed doing without requiring acknowledgement of the cost. He came through the back, same as always, and stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at her. "Gray dress," he said. "Gray dress," she confirmed. Something settled in his expression. "You're ready," he said. "I've been ready for 30 years," she said. "Today I just have the documentation to prove it." He almost smiled. The real one, brief and genuine. They drove to Abilene in Henry Dawson's wagon. Henry had insisted. And it was one of the few things he had insisted on since the morning in the back office, when Rosalie had made clear the terms of what forgiveness looked like. And she had accepted the insistence, because some gestures deserve acceptance. Henry sat up front with his driver. Rosalie and Wyatt sat in the back with Greer, who spent most of the 2-hour ride reviewing documents with the focused serenity of a man who has done this enough times to have made peace with the fact the work is the only thing you can control. "What's our opening?" Rosalie asked, somewhere around the 40-minute mark. "The web correspondence," Greer said, without looking up. "We lead with the most direct evidence of coordinated intent. Establish that what happened to your store was not isolated pressure, but deliberate strategy. Then we move to the pattern across 7 properties. Then the sworn statements. Then the testimony from Hadley's former associates. And Hadley himself," she said. He'll have representation, Greer said. Good representation. The Hadley family does not lack resources. He looked up then. What they lack is an explanation for the letters. I have not been able to think of one, and I've been trying for 2 weeks. Is that your way of saying we're going to win? She said. It's my way of saying the evidence is very strong, Greer said. Courts are not certainties, but the evidence is very strong. She looked out at the road. The 2 families who came forward, she said. The ones who lost their properties. Will they be there? Both of them, Greer said. James Whitmore and his wife. And the Carver family from the South End, a pause. The Carvers have been renting since the foreclosure. 2 years. She thought about that for a moment. 2 years of renting the home and business that used to be yours. Because a man with more resources than conscience had decided your vulnerability was an opportunity. All right, she said. Then let's make sure today counts for them too. The courtroom in Abilene was not large, but it was full. Rosalie had not expected that she had expected the formal participants. The legal parties, the judge and his clerk, and the opposing counsel, and whatever witnesses Hadley's lawyers had managed to assemble. She had not expected the gallery to be occupied almost entirely by people from Willow Creek. Earl McIntosh was there, hat in his lap, 3rd row. Helen Marsh was there beside him in her good coat. Marcus Tully from the hardware store. Ellen Grady from the seamstress shop. James Corrigan, who had lived in Willow Creek for 40 years. A dozen others she recognized, people whose names were in the community account of her town. People who had watched and waited and decided, apparently, that this morning was worth 2 hours on the road. She stopped just inside the courtroom door. She felt Wyatt stop beside her. Did you know they were coming? She said quietly. No, he said. Did you know? Earl McIntosh caught her eye from the 3rd row. He gave her a single deliberate nod. She nodded back. Then she walked to the plaintiff's table and sat down beside Greer and opened her ledger on the table in front of her. Because the ledger had been in this fight since the beginning, and it was going to be present at the end. Elias Hadley was already at the defense table. She had seen him at a distance before, a large, heavy man with the bearing of someone accustomed to being the most significant presence in any room. Up close, he was older than she had expected, and there was something in the set of his jaw that told her he was a man who had not seriously considered the possibility of this morning existing until it was too late to prevent it. His lawyers were 3. Greer was 1. The judge was a woman. Rosalie had not known that. She looked at the nameplate, Judge Augusta Crane. Regional Circuit, Abilene, and something in her chest, settled by another degree. Augusta Crane was 60, compact, with eyes that moved through the room, with the specific comprehensive attention of someone who had spent decades distinguishing between what was being said and what was true. She took her seat, arranged her papers, looked at the room over her glasses, and said, "We are here in the matter of the coordinated property acquisition complaint filed against Elias Hadley and associated parties." "Mr. Greer, you may begin." Greer stood. He was unhurried and precise, and he started exactly where he had said he would with the web correspondence. He read 3 letters aloud. The first established that Webb and Hadley had discussed Rosalie's loan renewal as a pressure mechanism 14 months ago, by name, with specificity about the documentation requirements that would be applied. The second established the competing supplier arrangement, the financial interest that made Webb's cooperation with Hadley personally profitable. The third, written 8 months ago, discussed the deed ambiguity and how it might be used. Hadley's lead lawyer objected twice. Judge Crane overruled both objections with the efficient brevity of a woman who had read the correspondence before she entered the room and was not finding the objections persuasive. When Greer finished reading the 3rd letter, the gallery was completely silent. Rosalie had her hands flat on the ledger. Steady. "The letters establish intent," Greer said to the judge. "What I will now demonstrate is pattern. Your Honor, I would like to direct your attention to the documented acquisition history of 7 Willow Creek properties over the past 4 years. each of which followed the same sequence of events that the plaintiff's case was in the process of experiencing. He laid the documentation on the judge's table. Judge Crane read. She read for 11 minutes without looking up. Then she looked at Hadley's lawyer. "Counsel," she said, "I'd like you to explain to me how the similarity of method across 7 separate transactions, the financial pressure, the bank involvement, the legal ambiguity manufactured around ownership, how that constitutes anything other than a coordinated scheme." Hadley's lawyer stood. He gave a response that lasted 4 minutes and was, in Rosalie's assessment, the most carefully constructed collection of words that meant nothing she had ever heard in her life. He spoke about market conditions and legitimate business interest, and the organic similarity of distressed property transactions, and the coincidental nature of method when operating in a consistent regional context. Judge Crane listened to all of it. Then she said, "That is not an explanation. That is a description of how the scheme could be reframed. Please provide an explanation." The silence that followed had a specific quality. It was the silence of a man with no answer. Hadley, at the defense table, moved for the first time since the proceedings began. A small involuntary movement, a shift of weight, a repositioning that someone less attentive than Rosalie would not have noticed, and that she catalogued with the precise satisfaction of a woman who had been paying careful attention for a very long time. He knew. He had known, she thought, from the moment Vance filed. He had simply hoped that power and representation could do what they had always done before: absorb the impact, redirect the narrative, make the problem manageable. He had not accounted for Judge Augusta Crane. He had not accounted for Samuel Greer. And he had not, Rosalie thought, looking at her ledger. At 4 years of clean numbers on the table, in front of her, he had not accounted for her. The sworn testimony from Hadley's former associates took 40 minutes and was, in Greer's later description, devastating in the specific way that first-hand testimony is always devastating, because it has faces and voices and the particular weight of someone saying, "I was there, and this is what happened," in a room full of people who can see their eyes when they say it. The first man who had managed property acquisition negotiations for Hadley for 3 years before a dispute over his own compensation had ended the relationship, described the process in language that was specific and operational and left no room for reinterpretation. He described the targeting criteria, the bank contacts, the pressure timeline, the moment when a formal offer was presented as a rescue rather than an acquisition. "Did Mr. Hadley discuss the Bennett property specifically?" Greer asked. "Yes," the man said. "About 5 months ago. He said it was the last significant holdout on Main Street. He said the woman running it was," he paused, with the expression of a man choosing words carefully, "a particular type. He said that type always broke eventually. You just had to find the right pressure point." The gallery made a sound. Judge Crane looked at the gallery. The gallery went quiet. Rosalie sat completely still. Wyatt, in the first row directly behind her, did not move either, but she could feel the quality of his stillness. And it was not the same as her stillness. His had something in it that required management. She did not turn around. She kept her eyes on the front. "A particular type," Greer said to the witness. "What did you understand him to mean by that?" "He meant a woman alone," the witness said. "With no husband, no partners, no," he paused again, "no one to stand beside her when things got difficult. He thought she was isolated." "And was she isolated?" Greer said. The witness looked at the plaintiff's table. He looked at Rosalie, and at Greer, and at the gallery behind them. "No," he said. "She was not." The second former associate's testimony addressed the web arrangement in operational detail that matched and extended the correspondence. And by the time he finished, Hadley's lead lawyer had stopped objecting, which told Rosalie everything she needed to know about how the defense had assessed the morning's trajectory. Judge Crane called a 30-minute recess. In the corridor outside the courtroom, Rosalie stood with Wyatt and Greer and did not speak for a full 2 minutes, which was a long time for her. Then he called me a particular type. Yes, Wyatt said. He targeted me because he thought I was alone, she said. Yes, Wyatt said. He was wrong about that, she said. Yes, Wyatt said he was. She looked at him. I want to testify, she said. Greer looked up from his notes. Rosalie, he said carefully. The case is, I know what the case is, she said. I know how strong the documentation is. I know we may not need my testimony to achieve the outcome we're seeking. She held his gaze. I want to testify anyway. I want to be on the record. I want my name and my voice and my 4 years of ledgers in that room speaking for themselves. She paused. Not just as evidence, as presence. Greer looked at her for a long moment. It could open you to cross-examination, he said. Good, she said. Let them cross-examine me. Let them stand up in front of Judge Crane and try to find a weakness in 4 years of clean books and honest operation. She looked at Greer steadily. I have been waiting 30 years to be in a room where the evidence of my own life is enough. Let me be in that room. Wyatt said nothing, because he understood that this was not a moment that required his voice. Greer looked back at Rosalie. All right, he said. She took the stand in the second half of the morning session. She brought the ledger. She set it on the railing beside her and put her hand on it and looked at Judge Crane and said, Your Honor, my name is Rosalie Bennett. I am the owner and sole operator of Bennett's Ranch Supply on Main Street, Willow Creek, Texas. I have operated this business for 4 years following my father's illness. I am here because a man decided my isolation was a business opportunity, and I would like to correct his assessment of my situation. Judge Crane looked at her over her glasses. There was something in the judge's expression, brief, controlled, almost entirely suppressed, that Rosalie read as the specific recognition that passes between women who have spent their lives being underestimated and know the look of it in each other. Proceed, the judge said. Rosalie testified for 22 minutes. She described the loan renewal documentation request. She described the web meeting and the language he had used and what she had understood it to mean. She described the deed situation and the legal fog that had been manufactured around her father's name. She described Cole Hadley's appearance at Hendricks and what she had understood that to signal. And then she opened the ledger. This is 4 years of the store's operation, she said. Every supplier account, every customer transaction, every loan payment made on schedule, every quarter balanced to the penny. I would like it entered into the record as a demonstration that the business Elias Hadley determined was ripe for acquisition was not failing. It was not in distress. It was operated with precision and integrity by a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. She looked at the judge. He did not target weakness. He manufactured the appearance of weakness around a business that had none. I would like that distinction to be clear. Hadley's lead lawyer rose for cross-examination. He asked 6 questions. They were careful questions, professionally constructed, designed to find inconsistencies in her account or create the appearance of uncertainty around her version of events. She answered every one of them directly, precisely, and without a single word that was not accurate. On the 6th question regarding her certainty that the documentation requests from Webb were outside normal procedures, she said, I have the account records of 11 comparable businesses in the region, provided by Mr. Greer, that demonstrate the documentation I was asked to provide was not standard procedure. I have reviewed them. The discrepancy is significant and consistent. Would you like me to walk through the comparison? The lawyer said. No further questions. He sat down. Judge Crane looked at Rosalie. Thank you, Ms. Bennett, she said. You may step down. Rosalie picked up her ledger. She stepped down. She walked back to the plaintiff's table. And she sat, and she set the ledger in front of her. And she put both hands flat on the cover, and she breathed. Wyatt leaned forward from the row behind her. Perfect, he said quietly. One word. She did not turn around, but she let herself receive it. Judge Crane's ruling came at 2:45 in the afternoon. Following a lunch recess during which Rosalie ate half a sandwich and Greer reviewed his notes, Wyatt and Pate sat beside her and talked about the grain harvest on the Dawson spread in the specific, deliberate way of someone who understands that the mind needs somewhere ordinary to rest when everything else is extraordinary. The ruling took 19 minutes to deliver. Judge Crane found coordinated fraud across 7 of the 8 targeted properties, with the Bennett property representing the attempted 8. She ordered the immediate referral of the case to the Regional Land Commissioner and the County Attorney for criminal investigation of Elias Hadley and his associated parties. She ordered Marcus Webb's removal from his position at First Willow Creek Bank, pending the bank examiner's review. She ordered the freezing of Hadley's Main Street property holdings, pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. And she noted, in language that was precise and formal, and that Rosalie read 3 times in the typed copy she received, that the documented pattern represented a sustained and deliberate exploitation of community members' vulnerability, and that the court found it particularly egregious that the targeting criteria included the specific isolation and social marginalization of business owners who lacked conventional support structures. She had written isolation and social marginalization into the record. She had made it real and official and permanent. Rosalie sat with that sentence for a long time. The gallery erupted when the ruling concluded, not in noise exactly, more in the specific release of a room full of people who have been holding something for a long time and have finally been given permission to set it down. Earl McIntosh did not make a sound, but his hat went onto his head with the satisfied precision of a man making a statement. Helen Marsh was crying again, and this time she was not pretending it was dust. James Whitmore, who had lost the feed operation 3 years ago and had driven 2 hours to be in this room, came to Rosalie at the plaintiff's table and shook her hand and did not say anything for a moment, because he couldn't, and she held his hand with both of hers and waited until he could. "Thank you," he said. "This was yours too," she said. "It was all of ours." He nodded. He went back to his wife. The Carver family, father, mother, 2 children who had spent 2 years renting the home that used to be theirs, found her outside in the corridor. And the mother took her hand and said, "We didn't know anyone was fighting for us." And Rosalie said, "You would have done the same." And the mother said, "I hope I would have." And Rosalie squeezed her hand and believed her. Greer found her afterward with the organized satisfaction of a man who respects the work and finds genuine pleasure in it done well. "The criminal investigation will take time," he said. "Possibly a year or more. But the referral is made and it will not be dropped. The evidence is too comprehensive. The 7 properties," she said. "The families who lost them. The criminal proceeding opens the possibility of restitution," he said. "I cannot promise the outcome, but the possibility exists in a way it did not this morning." She nodded. "Send me the final billing," she said. "For everything. Henry has already," Greer began. "Send it to me," looked at her. "Yes," he said. "All right." The drive back to Willow Creek was quieter than the drive out had been. The way the return from something significant is always quieter, the energy of anticipation replaced by something more settled, more real, the particular weight of a thing that has actually happened rather than a thing you were moving toward. Henry rode up front again. Greer had stayed in Abilene for follow-up filings. Rosalie sat in the back with Wyatt, and the late afternoon light came through the wagon covering, and the road moved underneath them, and the world was the particular shade of gold that Texas turns in the hour before evening. "How do you feel?" Wyatt asked. She thought about it honestly. "Like I put something down," she said. He was quiet. "That thing you said," he said, "on the stand. About waiting 30 years to be in a room where the evidence of your own life was enough." "Yes," she said. "Was it enough?" he said. "Today, was the room what you needed it to be?" She thought about Judge Augusta Crane writing isolation and social marginalization into the permanent record. She thought about James Whitmore's hand in both of hers. She thought about the Carver family and the 2 years of renting. She thought about Earl McIntosh's hat settling onto his head with that particular satisfaction. "Yes," she said. He nodded. "Good," he said. They rode in silence for a while, and the silence was the comfortable kind. The kind that has been earned through enough difficult conversation to be trusted. Then Wyatt said, "I have something to ask you." She looked at him. He reached into his jacket pocket and set something on the wagon seat between them. It was not a ring, it was a deed. She picked it up and looked at it. It was the deed to a parcel of land adjacent to the Bennett property, a lot she knew, that had been empty for 2 years, that she had looked at occasionally and thought about in the abstract way you think about things you want, but have not yet let yourself want directly. "I've been holding that for 3 weeks," Wyatt said. "I bought it before the filing, before the hearing, before any of this." He held her gaze. "Because I told you I came here on purpose and I intend to demonstrate that it wasn't temporary." She looked at the deed. She looked at him. "You bought the land next to my store," she said. "I'm a ranch foreman," he said. "I need somewhere to operate from. And I would like to operate from somewhere that is adjacent to what matters most to me." She was quiet for a moment. "Adjacent," she said. "Or closer," he said, "if that's ever what you want. At whatever pace you want it. On your terms, Rosalie." All of it. She looked at the deed in her hands. She thought about the cold ashes and the burning photographs and the word easier, wearing grooves, and 30 years of standing straight when everything said collapse. She thought about the 4 times she had almost talked herself out of Friday. She thought about the fence and the almost smile, and her father saying son in the letter her mother had written, and the stars over Willow Creek being excessive and personal. She thought about putting something down. She looked up at him. "I want it," she said. "I want closer." Something moved across his face, not the almost smile. Not the real smile, but something deeper than both of them. Something that had no performance in it whatsoever, and did not need any. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. She held the deed. He took her hand, the way he had taken it on the front steps, steadily. Without drama, like a man who has decided something and intends to stand by it. They rode back to Willow Creek like that. The town was waiting. Which she had not expected, and which she discovered was something Willow Creek did when it had made a collective decision about something it gathered. On the boardwalk, at the hitching posts, at the open doors of the businesses along Main Street. People who had been in the courtroom, and people who had gotten the news by the particular rapid telegraph of small-town communication that operated faster than any wire. Earl McIntosh was on the boardwalk in front of the hardware store. Helen Marsh was beside him. When the wagon stopped in front of Bennett's Supply, Rosalie stepped down and looked at the street she had been born on, and worked on, and refused to give up. And for a moment nobody said anything, because some things are large enough that the space before words matters. Then Helen said, "Well, ruled in our favor," Rosalie said. "All of it." The street made a sound. Earl McIntosh said. "Good." It was for Earl practically a speech. Helen was crying properly now. Not pretending anything, and she crossed the boardwalk and put her arms around Rosalie and held on. And Rosalie let herself be held, which was something she was getting better at. "Your mother," Helen said. "She would have, I know," Rosalie said. "I know." Thomas Bennett was at the upstairs window. She looked up and found him there, in his chair, with the lamp lit behind him, looking down at the street. He lifted one hand, the right one, the steady one, when he saw her. She lifted hers back. The store reopened Monday morning at 7, same as always. And the first customer through the door was Earl McIntosh, who needed fence wire and offered exactly as many words as he always offered, which was exactly the right number. The second customer was Marcus Tully from the hardware store, who had never been a customer before, and who came in with a supply list and a handshake and said, "Figured it was time we did more business together." The third was Ellen Grady from the seamstress shop, who ordered enough dry goods to keep the account active for a year and said, while she was writing the order, I told my husband last night that it's been a long time since this street felt like a street. I think it's starting to feel like one again. By noon, 6 businesses on Main Street had opened accounts at Bennett's Supply. Rosalie updated the ledger with each one, in the column under her father's first entry, in the handwriting that she had spent 4 years, making indistinguishable from his because she had understood. From the beginning, that continuation was its own form of honor. Wyatt came in at noon with a wrapped package. She looked at it. "What is that?" she said. "Open it," he said. It was a sign. Hand-carved wood, clean and precise, with the letters painted steady and dark. Bennett's Ranch Supply, ST 1860. She looked at it for a long time. "The sign outside is fine," she said. "The sign outside is weathered and one bad storm from unreadable," he said. "This one will last." "You made this," she said. "I made it 3 weeks ago," he said. "Same time as the land deed." "I told you I came here on purpose." She held the sign. She felt the weight of the carved wood, the precision of the letters. The particular quality of something made by hand for a specific person, by someone who knew what it meant. "You're going to be insufferable," she said. "Probably," he said. She looked at the sign. She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. "Put it up when you're ready," he said. No rush. She put it up that afternoon. Wyatt hung it while she watched from below, and when it was level she said left side. Half an inch, and he adjusted without comment, and when it was right she said that's it. He climbed down, and they both stood on the boardwalk and looked at it. Bennett's Ranch Supply, 1860. Solid and clear and not going anywhere. The hearing's aftermath moved through the following weeks, in stages: the bank examiner's review of Webb's conduct, the county attorney's opening of the criminal investigation, the regional land commissioner's formal inquiry into the 7 properties. Greer corresponded with her regularly, and read every letter and asked precise questions, and kept her own notes in the back of the ledger, in the column she had opened for the purpose. She was not leaving this to chance or to other people's attention. She was watching every step. Elias Hadley did not appear in Willow Creek again. Cole Hadley appeared once, briefly, at the general store, with the look of a young man reassessing the landscape he had inherited and finding it considerably more complicated than advertised. He nodded at Rosalie when he passed her on the boardwalk. She nodded back. Wyatt began building on the adjacent lot in the 3rd week of September, a solid structure that he described as a base of operations, and that Thomas Bennett, from his window, described with a small smile as a declaration. Thomas was having more good days than difficult ones. The doctor said the stabilization was real, not temporary, the result of rest and routine and Thomas's own theory, offered to Rosalie with the dry humor of a man who had spent 40 years being right about things, the result of having something to watch from the window that was worth watching. "He builds well," Thomas said one afternoon, watching Wyatt work on the adjacent lot. "He does," Rosalie said. "Like a man who intends to stay," Thomas said. "He does intend to stay," she said. Thomas looked at her. "And you," he said, "do you intend to let him?" She thought about the deed in her keeping, the sign above the door, the hand taken on the front steps, and the one taken in the back of Henry Dawson's wagon on the road from Abilene. She thought about putting things down and being adjacent and closer, and all of it on her terms at her pace. "Yes," Thomas nodded. "Good," he said. Rosalie Bennett married Wyatt Callahan on the 2nd Saturday of October. In the simplest ceremony she could design, and still have Helen Marsh stop crying long enough to witness it. In the store her father had built, and she had kept, and no one had been able to take. There were no grand speeches. There was no performance of overcoming or triumph, or the specific theater of a love story that has made its point. There were just the people who had been in the room for the real work, Thomas, in his chair brought downstairs for the occasion, Henry Dawson with his hat in his hands and a quietness about him that looked like something finally finished, Earl McIntosh, who wore his best hat and said exactly 4 words the entire evening. Helen Marsh, who cried from beginning to end and was not apologizing for any of it. Greer, who had come back from Abilene for the occasion and who shook Wyatt's hand with both of his and told him he had made an excellent decision. Rosalie stood in her own store in the gray dress, with the new sign visible through the front window. And she looked at Wyatt Callahan and said the words that made it true. He said them back. She had spent 30 years being told she was too much, too large, too independent, too complicated, too difficult, too loud, too stubborn, too everything the wrong kind, and not enough of anything the right kind. She had spent 30 years carrying it, and building things anyway, and keeping going through every morning that cost her, and refusing to close the store, and refusing to sell the store, and refusing to collapse even when collapse was the only thing her body had left to offer. And what she knew now, what she had earned the right to know through every single one of those mornings, was this: she had never been too much. She had been exactly enough. She had simply been waiting, without knowing she was waiting, for a room large enough to hold her, a life built wide enough for a woman who took up exactly the space she deserved. No more and no less, and who had found at last someone with the specific courage and the specific patience and the depth of character required to stand beside that without flinching. The world would always have its Elias Hadleys, its Marcus Webbs, its Cole Hadleys with their thin smiles and their calculated assessments of other people's isolation. The world would always have its boardwalk whispers and its church step certainties and its cheerful, devastating news delivered across dry goods counters. But the world also had Earl McIntosh saying "fool" meant him, not you, and Helen Marsh, who knew her mother and cried without pretense, and Thomas Bennett, who signed his name with a steady hand and said yours and meant every wall of the building and every year of the work and every morning she had opened the door. And the world had Wyatt Callahan, who had come to Willow Creek on purpose and stayed on purpose and loved her on purpose, not despite the full, complicated, load-bearing, uncontained entirety of who she was. Because of it. Every single part of it. That was what Rosalie Bennett had learned. In the store her father built and she saved, in the town that had tried to decide her future before she opened her mouth. In the summer that changed everything. The right person does not ask you to be smaller. The right person builds something large enough for you to stand in completely. And that is not too much. That is exactly enough. That is everything.